She gave him everything, her loyalty, her brilliance, her heart, and watched him give it all to someone else. Queen Seraphina Vale learned the hardest truth a woman can learn. Love given to the wrong man becomes a prison with golden bars. Tonight, in front of the entire empire, she'll discover that sometimes the only way to save yourself is to let everything burn. Stick around till the end. This story gets darker before it gets light. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments, so I know my tribe is watching. You're gonna need each other for this one. Welcome. The winter wind cut through the palace corridors like a blade through silk. Seraphina stood at the window of the eastern tower, watching torchlight flicker across the courtyard below, where servants prepared for the solstice gala. 5 years married to an emperor who barely remembered her name. 5 years of smiling through humiliation, of perfecting the art of existing beside a man who looked through her like she was glass. Her reflection stared back from the dark window. 27 years old and already a ghost. The empire called her beautiful. Striking, even. Dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders, eyes the color of winter storms, a face that belonged on ancient coins. But beauty meant nothing when the one person who mattered most looked at you and saw only furniture. Behind her, Margot entered without knocking. The handmaiden had been with Seraphina since childhood, which meant she was one of 3 people in the entire palace who still treated the queen like a human being rather than a portrait. The emperor's mistress arrived an hour ago, Margot said quietly. She's wearing red. Of course she was wearing red. Leoravex wore red the way a conqueror plants a flag, loud, shameless, territorial. The woman had been Lucien's obsession for 3 years, paraded through the palace like a second wife, given chambers in the west wing that overlooked the rose garden. The same garden where Lucien had proposed to Seraphina 6 years ago, back when he still pretended to love her. Does she know I can hear the laughter from their wing? Seraphina asked. Or does she simply not care? The entire palace can hear it, Your Majesty. Seraphina turned from the window. Stop calling me that when we're alone. I'm just Sarah. I've been just Sarah for years. Margot's expression hardened. You're the queen of this empire whether he treats you like one or not. Queens have power, Margot. I have a title and a crown I'm required to wear while everyone watches my husband build a life with another woman. She moved to the vanity, staring at the jewelry box that held the crown. White gold and diamonds, delicate as frost, heavy as a millstone. She'd worn it at the coronation while Lucien smiled at the crowd and whispered in her ear that he hoped she understood this marriage was political, nothing more. She'd been 22 and stupid enough to believe love could grow where it had been promised. 5 years later, she knew better. He's requested your presence tonight, Margot said, for appearances. Of course he has. Seraphina's laugh came out sharp. Can't have the solstice gala without the decorative wife. What would the nobles think? She pulled the crown from its box and set it on her head, watching herself transform in the mirror. There she was, Queen Seraphina Vale, beloved by the people, invisible to her husband, slowly disappearing from the inside out. Do you want to know what I did today? She asked Margot. While Lucien was doing whatever emperors do when they're not pretending their marriages exist, you met with the grain merchants from the southern provinces. I restructured the entire agricultural trade system. Seraphina's voice was flat. 7 provinces were on the edge of famine because corrupt nobles were hoarding supply and inflating prices. I broke their monopoly, opened direct trade routes to the capital, and just saved approximately 40,000 people from starvation. Do you know what Lucien said when I told him? Margot waited. Nothing. He was reading correspondence from his generals and didn't look up. The handmaiden's jaw tightened. He's a fool. No, he's an emperor who married a strategic alliance and resents being tied to it. Seraphina stood, smoothing her gown, ice blue silk that made her look like winter itself. I was useful for securing the northern territories through my family name. The moment the ink dried on those treaties, I became irrelevant. You run half this empire. I run the half he finds boring. Seraphina moved toward the door. Let's go. Time to play my favorite role. The wife who pretends not to notice her husband arriving with his mistress on his arm. But the grand hall blazed with candlelight and ambition. Every noble family in the empire had sent representatives, all of them dressed in their finest, all of them pretending not to watch the royal family's slow-motion collapse. Seraphina descended the main staircase alone. her entrance timed perfectly to arrive before Lucian made his. The crowd parted. Eyes followed her, some with pity, some with respect, most with the hungry curiosity of people watching someone bleed in public. Duke Aldrich Thorne waited at the base of the stairs, offering his arm. He was 50-something, silver-haired, one of the few nobles who'd supported every reform Serafina pushed through council. More importantly, he was one of the few who looked at her and saw a person instead of a political tragedy. "Your Majesty." His voice was warm. "You look particularly formidable tonight." "I look like I'm about to watch my husband humiliate me in front of 300 guests." She took his arm anyway. "But thank you for pretending otherwise." They moved through the crowd. Nobles bowed, murmured greetings, studied her face for cracks. Serafina had learned to give them nothing. Perfect posture, pleasant smile, eyes that revealed absolutely nothing about the woman screaming inside. "The eastern provinces are thriving under your new trade policies," Aldrich said quietly. 3 new markets opened last month. The merchants are calling it the Queen's Prosperity. "They should call it basic economics and human decency," Serafina replied. "But I'll take the credit if it keeps people from starving." "You're too modest. I'm too tired." She glanced at him. "Do you ever wonder what would happen if I just stopped?" "Stopped what?" "All of it. Fixing problems no one else wants to solve. Holding this empire together while everyone watches it fracture. Pretending I don't notice I'm married to a man who's building a second life without me." Aldrich's expression grew serious. The empire would collapse within 6 months. Lucian's brilliant at military strategy and terrible at everything else. You're the only reason this realm still functions. "How comforting!" Serafina's laugh was bitter. "I'm structurally necessary, like a load-bearing wall everyone ignores until it starts to crack." Before Aldrich could respond, a ripple moved through the crowd. Conversations quieted, heads turned toward the main entrance. Emperor Lucian Draven had arrived, and Leora Vex was on his arm. Serafina felt her spine turn to ice. 5 years of this, and it still felt like being stabbed in a fresh place every time. Lucien was 32, dark-haired and sharp-featured, wearing black and gold that made him look like a war god who'd gotten bored with conquest. He moved through the crowd with easy confidence, nodding to nobles, accepting their bows like he was born to command. Which he was. Third son of a murdered emperor, raised by generals, trained to fight and lead and take what he wanted without apology. He'd wanted the throne. He'd gotten it by being more ruthless than his brothers. He'd wanted the Northern Alliance. He'd gotten it by marrying Serafina. He'd never wanted her. Leora glittered beside him in crimson silk, dark curls piled high, wearing sapphires that probably cost more than most nobles made in a year. She was beautiful in that obvious way that men noticed immediately, curves and confidence and the kind of sexuality that announced itself before she entered a room. She was everything Serafina wasn't. Warm where Serafina was reserved. Playful where Serafina was serious. Uncomplicated where Serafina was complex. And Lucien looked at her the way Serafina had spent 5 years hoping he'd look at his wife. The crowd watched, hungry for disaster. This was the Empire's worst-kept secret, played out in public like a theatrical production. The cold marriage, the passionate affair, the queen who was too dignified to fight for a man who didn't want to be kept. Serafina stood perfectly still, Aldrich's arm beneath hers, and let them all see exactly nothing on her face. Lucian's eyes found hers across the hall. For one brief moment, something flickered in his expression. Guilt, maybe, or annoyance at being caught in his own shamelessness. Then it was gone, replaced by that same distant politeness he'd perfected over 5 years of their marriage. He crossed the hall toward her. Leora remained near the entrance, talking to a cluster of younger nobles who were too ambitious to care about propriety. "Serafina," Lucien's voice was formal. "You look well." "Your Majesty." She used his title like a weapon. "Thank you for noticing." Something tightened around his eyes. They both knew what this was. The same dance they'd performed at every public event for years. Acknowledge each other just enough to maintain appearances. Exchange pleasantries empty of meaning. Pretend their marriage was anything other than a political arrangement that had curdled into mutual resentment. "I trust you've had a productive day," he said. "I restructured 7 provincial trade systems and potentially prevented a famine." Her smile was razor sharp. How was your afternoon? The hit landed. Lucien's jaw tightened. I was meeting with my generals about the border conflicts. Of course you were. Serafina's tone suggested she knew exactly what he'd been doing, and it had nothing to do with generals. The Empire is fortunate to have such a dedicated ruler. Aldrich cleared his throat delicately. Your Majesty, the musicians are beginning. Perhaps you'd care to open the dancing? It was tradition. The Emperor and Empress, first dance of the Solstice Gala, 300 nobles watching to see if the Empire's most broken marriage could fake unity for 3 minutes. Lucien looked at Serafina. She looked back, daring him to refuse. Of course, he said finally. Shall we? He offered his hand. She took it, feeling nothing but cold skin and colder duty. They moved to the center of the hall as the crowd cleared space. The musicians struck up a waltz, something classical and elegant, designed for this exact moment. Lucien's hand settled at Serafina's waist. Her hand rested on his shoulder. They'd done this dozens of times, and it had never felt like anything but choreographed distance. They began to move. You're angry, Lucien said quietly. I'm breathing, Serafina replied. Don't confuse the two. I know this situation is difficult. Difficult? She laughed, low and sharp. You walked into our empire's most important celebration with your mistress on your arm while your wife stood alone on the stairs. Difficult doesn't begin to cover what this situation is. His hand tightened at her waist. Leora is a friend, a political ally. Her family controls 3 key provinces. Stop! Serafina's voice cut like glass. Don't insult me by pretending this is politics. You're sleeping with her. The entire empire knows. My own handmaiden heard you laughing with her last night from chambers close enough to mine that I could hear it too. Lucien's expression hardened. I didn't force you into this marriage, Serafina. You knew what it was. I knew it was political. I didn't know you'd spend 5 years making me feel like a mistake you regretted every time you looked at me. That's not fair. Fair? Something cracked in her voice, just for a moment. You want to discuss fairness? I gave you everything. My family's alliance, my political support, my loyalty. I run your empire while you chase glory and other women. I hold this realm together while you treat me like furniture. And you want to talk to me about fair? The music swelled around them. They turned together, perfectly synchronized, 2 people who'd learned to move as one unit while remaining completely separate. What do you want from me? Lucien asked. We agreed this marriage was political. I want you to stop making me watch. The words came out raw. I want you to stop parading her through my home like you're rubbing my face in how much you prefer her company to mine. I want you to stop treating me like I'm invisible, except when you need me to play the decorative wife for events like this. I don't treat you like you're invisible. You didn't even know I restructured the agricultural system today. Serafina met his eyes. 7 provinces, 40,000 lives. I told you this morning at breakfast, and you were reading correspondence from your generals and didn't hear a word I said. Lucien's jaw tightened. I have an empire to run. So do I. Her voice was quiet now, dangerously quiet. The difference is I'm actually doing it while you're busy playing war and romance. The music was ending. Their dance was almost over. This conversation is going nowhere, Lucien said. We should discuss this in private. Why? Serafina pulled back as the final notes faded. So you can dismiss me more comfortably? Tell me again how our marriage is political, so I should stop expecting basic respect? Remind me that I'm useful for my family name and my administrative skills, but not worth your actual attention? The crowd was applauding. They bowed to each other, a perfect mimicry of courtesy. You're being dramatic, Lucien said. I'm being honest. Serafina straightened, meeting his eyes with something cold and final settling in her chest. There's a difference. You should learn it. She turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the center of the dance floor. The next hour was torture, dressed as celebration. Serafina moved through the gala like a ghost, making conversation she didn't remember, smiling at nobles whose names blurred together, accepting compliments on her dress and her policies while watching Lucien across the hall with Leora. They weren't even being subtle anymore. He leaned close to hear something she whispered. She laughed and touched his arm. They moved through the crowd together like they were the married couple, while Serafina stood alone near the windows and felt herself disappearing. You should leave, Aldrich said quietly, appearing beside her. No one would fault you. Everyone would fault me. Seraphina's voice was hollow. The queen who couldn't even tolerate her husband's mistress at a public event? I'd be the scandal of the season. You already are the scandal of the season. At least if you left, you'd be in control of it. She looked at him. When did you become wise? Around the same time you became too dignified for your own good. His expression was serious. Seraphina, listen to me. This empire needs you, but you're killing yourself trying to hold together a marriage that died years ago. At some point, you have to decide whether being queen is worth being invisible. Before she could respond, a commotion erupted near the main entrance. Raised voices, gasps from the crowd, nobles backing away from something. Seraphina turned to see a young soldier forcing his way through the guards, his uniform torn and bloodied, desperation carved into every line of his face. Your Majesty! He spotted Lucien and stumbled forward. The eastern border! We've been attacked! The hall went silent. Lucien strode toward the soldier, war instinct overriding everything else. Report. Raiders from across the mountains. The soldier was shaking, whether from exhaustion or fear. Thousands of them. They hit 3 garrison towns before we knew what was happening. Burned everything. Killed. His voice broke. They killed everyone, Your Majesty. Women, children, everyone. Horror rippled through the crowd. Seraphina's blood turned cold. The eastern border. Those were the territories she'd just restructured. The towns that had been starving 6 months ago, now thriving because of the trade routes she'd opened, now burning. How many casualties? Lucien's voice was sharp, commander-focused. We don't know yet. Hundreds, maybe thousands. They hit us at night, coordinated, like they'd been planning it for months. Impossible. One of Lucien's generals pushed forward. We have scouts on that border, early warning systems. They failed. The soldier's eyes were haunted. Or someone betrayed us. Either way, they're coming deeper into Imperial territory, and we don't have the forces to stop them. Lucien's face had gone hard as stone. How long until they reach the capital? If they keep moving at this pace, the soldier met his eyes. A week. Maybe less. The grand hall erupted, nobles shouting questions, demanding protection, some already planning to flee to their estates. Lucien was barking orders at his generals, his entire focus snapped to the crisis. And Seraphina stood frozen, watching her life's work burn. Those towns, those people. She'd saved them from starvation only to deliver them to slaughter. Something inside her cracked. She'd spent 5 years holding this empire together. 5 years fixing problems everyone else ignored while her husband chased glory and other women. 5 years making herself useful, necessary, structurally important. And for what? So she could watch people she'd saved die while her husband planned military strategy and didn't even look at her? Seraphina moved through the chaos toward Lucien. He was surrounded by generals, already mapping battle plans in his head, the emperor she'd married finally visible in his element. Lucien? He didn't turn. Lucien. Not now, Seraphina. His voice was distracted. I need to mobilize troops. Those are my territories. Her voice cut through the noise. The towns burning right now are the ones I restructured. The people dying are the ones I saved from starvation 6 months ago. He glanced at her, impatient. I'm aware. We'll discuss reconstruction after we handle the immediate crisis. We'll discuss it now. Something in her tone made him actually look at her. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. Those are my people. You're not a soldier. Lucien turned back to his generals. You're staying here where it's safe. Safe? Seraphina laughed, and the sound was broken enough that several nobles nearby stopped talking. I haven't been safe since I married you. At least on the battlefield, I'd know exactly who my enemies are. Lucien's expression hardened. This conversation is over. General Thrace, mobilize the Eastern legions. I'm going with you, Seraphina said again. You're staying here. His voice was final. That's an order. From my emperor. The words tasted like ash. Not my husband. Don't do this now. When should I do it? Something was breaking loose inside her chest, years of silence cracking open. When you're back from war, when you've saved the empire again, and I'm here waiting like I always am, when should I finally tell you that I'm drowning in a marriage where I'm nothing but furniture? The hall had gone quiet again. everyone watching the emperor and his queen finally tear each other apart in public. Lucien's jaw was tight. "We'll discuss this in private." "No." Serafina's voice was steady now, terrifyingly steady. "We won't, because you don't discuss things with me, Lucian. You give orders, you make decisions, you inform me of your plans and expect me to smile and support you like the good political wife I'm supposed to be." "Serafina, I'm done." The words felt like liberation and destruction at once. "I'm done being invisible, done being useful, done holding together an empire for a man who can't even see me unless he needs something." Lucien's expression was unreadable. "You're upset about the attack. I'm upset about 5 years of being married to someone who treats me like a stranger." Her voice didn't shake. "The attack just reminded me that I've been saving people who matter more to me than I matter to you." She reached up and removed the crown from her head. The crown he'd placed there 5 years ago with promises he'd never intended to keep. The hall went dead silent. "Serafina, don't..." She held it out to him. "You should give this to Leora. She's the woman you actually want beside you." Lucian didn't take the crown. "You're being hysterical. I'm being clear." Serafina's eyes met his. "For the first time in 5 years, I'm being completely clear. I'm not your wife, Lucian. I'm your political alliance and your empire's administrator, and I'm tired of pretending that's enough." She set the crown on the table beside them and walked toward the door. "Serafina, if you leave this hall right now..." She stopped, turned. "What? You'll what exactly? Divorce me? You'd lose the Northern Alliance. Exile me? You'd lose the half of the empire I actually run. Ignore me?" Her laugh was sharp. "You're already doing that. You're making a scene." "Good." The word came out fierce. "Let them all see. Let the entire empire watch the queen who spent 5 years invisible finally demand to be seen." She moved toward the door, past nobles who parted like water, past Margot who was crying, past everything she'd been for 5 years. "Your Majesty." Aldrich's voice stopped her at the threshold. He was holding something, her cloak, heavy winter velvet. "You'll need this. It's cold outside." Serafina took it, seeing understanding in his eyes. "Thank you. Where will you go?" "I don't know." She fastened the cloak. "Somewhere I can breathe." Behind her, Lucien was shouting orders again, the crisis swallowing his attention. He'd already moved past her. Again. Serafina walked out of the grand hall and into the winter night, and for the first time in 5 years, she had absolutely no idea what came next. Water. She made it to the stables before the shaking started. Her hands trembled as she saddled her horse, a white mare named Aurora that had been a wedding gift from her father. The only wedding gift she'd actually wanted. "Your Majesty." One of the stable hands appeared. "Should I prepare an escort?" "No." Serafina's voice was steadier than she felt. "I'm riding alone." "But the raiders are a week away and headed for richer targets than a queen on horseback." She swung into the saddle. "Tell anyone who asks that I went to survey the eastern provinces." "In the middle of the night?" "Tell them I couldn't sleep. It wasn't a lie. Tell them I needed to see the damage for myself." She rode out before he could argue, Aurora's hooves crunching through snow, the palace falling away behind her like a nightmare she was finally waking from. The night was freezing and clear. Stars scattered across black sky like diamonds on velvet. Serafina rode hard, putting distance between herself and everything she'd just walked away from. She didn't know where she was going. Didn't care. For 5 years, she'd been Queen Serafina Vale, wife of Emperor Lucian Draven, ruler of nothing that mattered. She'd been useful and necessary and completely invisible. Tonight, she'd made herself seen, and it felt like dying and being born at the same time. The mare carried her through the imperial forests, past checkpoints where guards recognized the queen and let her pass without question. An hour outside the capital, Serafina finally slowed, letting Aurora walk while she caught her breath. What had she done? She'd walked away from the solstice gala, removed her crown in front of the entire court, told her husband she was done. The scandal would be catastrophic, the political fallout worse. Her family would be furious, the empire would fracture, and she couldn't bring herself to care. 5 years of caring had left her hollow. Maybe it was time to be selfish. Maybe it was time to choose herself instead of duty. Maybe Aurora suddenly reared, nearly throwing her. Easy, easy. Serafina fought to control the mare, scanning the darkness. Movement in the trees. Her heart slammed into her throat. Raiders. They were supposed to be a week away, headed for the eastern border, nowhere near the capital. A figure stepped into the road ahead of her. Not a raider. A man in dark clothes, face shadowed by a hood, standing perfectly still in the middle of the path like he'd been waiting for her. Queen Serafina. His voice was deep, accent unfamiliar. We've been looking for you. Ice flooded her veins. Who are you? Someone who knows what you did tonight. He moved closer. Aurora backed away, nervous. Walking away from your emperor in front of the entire court. Removing your crown. Making yourself vulnerable. I'm not vulnerable. You're alone in the woods in the middle of the night with no guards and no allies. His smile was audible. I'd say that's the definition of vulnerable. Serafina's hand went to the knife at her belt. Small, decorative, completely inadequate for actual defense. What do you want? To make you an offer. I'm not interested. You should be. He pushed back his hood, revealing a face she didn't recognize. 30s, scarred, eyes that had seen too much violence to ever look soft. Because the raiders hitting your eastern territories? They're not random. And the border defenses that failed? They didn't fail by accident. Her blood turned to ice. What are you saying? I'm saying someone inside your empire orchestrated those attacks. His expression was serious. And I'm saying that same someone is going to use the crisis to move against your husband. There's a coup coming, Your Majesty. And you just walked away from the only protection you had. Serafina stared at him. You're lying. Am I? He tilted his head. Think about it. Perfect timing. Coordinated attack. Defense systems that mysteriously failed. Your husband's attention completely focused on the military crisis while political enemies position themselves. Who sent you? Someone who wants to see you survive what's coming. He stepped closer. Someone who thinks a queen who can walk away from her crown is a queen worth saving. I don't need saving. Yes, you do. His voice was flat. Because in about 10 minutes, Imperial guards are going to come down this road looking for you, and when they find you out here alone, they're going to escort you back to the palace. Back to your husband. Back to being invisible. Serafina's hands tightened on the reins. And you're offering what, exactly? An alternative? Freedom. The word hung in the cold air. Come with me, right now. I'll take you somewhere safe. Somewhere you can figure out who you actually are without an emperor telling you who you're supposed to be. Why would you do that? Because I work for someone who believes you're more valuable alive and free than dead or trapped. He extended his hand. But you have approximately 30 seconds to decide before those guards show up. After that, your window closes. In the distance, Serafina heard hoofbeats. Multiple horses. Coming fast. The guards. Just like he'd predicted. Her entire life balanced on the edge of this moment. Go back to the palace, to Lucicien, to 5 more years of being invisible, or ride into the darkness with a stranger who claimed to offer freedom. It was insane, dangerous, possibly suicidal. She looked at his hand, looked at the road behind her, heard the hoofbeats getting closer, and realized she'd already made her choice the moment she removed her crown. Serafina kicked Aurora forward, past the stranger. If you're lying, I'll kill you myself. Noted. He swung onto a horse that appeared from the shadows. Follow me. Stay close. Don't make a sound. They rode into the forest as the Imperial guards reached the main road behind them, their torches bright against the darkness, searching for a queen who'd finally stopped waiting to be found. They rode for 2 hours through darkness so complete Serafina could barely see Aurora's white mane ahead of her. The stranger moved like he knew these woods intimately, taking paths that didn't exist, guiding them through terrain that would have killed her if she'd been alone. She didn't speak, didn't ask questions. Just followed, because turning back meant returning to a palace where she'd publicly burned every bridge she had. The hoofbeats behind them had faded an hour ago. Either the guards had lost their trail or given up. Either way, Serafina was committed now. She'd made her choice in that moment on the road, and there was no walking it back. Finally, the stranger slowed. Ahead, through the trees, Serafina saw lights. A village, small and isolated, tucked into a valley she didn't recognize. "Where are we?" Her voice was rough from cold and silence. "Somewhere that doesn't exist on imperial maps." He dismounted. "Somewhere your husband's soldiers won't think to look." They led the horses through narrow streets. The village was strange, buildings that looked abandoned from the outside but showed signs of recent occupation. Smoke from chimneys, fresh tracks in snow. People moving behind shuttered windows. A hidden place, a refuge for people who needed to disappear. The stranger stopped at a house near the village center. Knocked twice, then once, then 3 times. A pattern. The door opened immediately. "Inside," he gestured. "Quickly!" Serafina hesitated. This was the moment. Once she walked through that door, she crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She'd be a queen who'd abandoned her post during a crisis, who'd fled with a stranger, who'd chosen herself over duty. She thought about Lucian's face when she'd removed her crown, the way he'd looked through her, even then, the way he'd always looked through her. She walked inside. The house was warm, fire burning in the hearth, food on the table, maps spread across every surface. And sitting in a chair near the fire, watching her with eyes that missed nothing, was a woman Serafina had never seen before. She was maybe 50, silver-haired, wearing clothes that suggested wealth but not nobility. Her face was sharp, intelligent, beautiful in that way some women become more striking as they age. She studied Serafina the way a general studies terrain before battle. "Your Majesty." Her voice was cultured, accent suggesting southern provinces. "Thank you for trusting us enough to come." "I didn't trust you." Serafina was too tired to be diplomatic. "I just ran out of alternatives." "Honest." The woman smiled. "Good. We don't have time for pleasantries anyway. Sit. You look like you're about to collapse." Serafina sat. The stranger who'd brought her here moved to the door, standing guard. "My name is Alara Voss." The woman poured wine, handed Serafina a cup. "I run a network of people who find it beneficial to operate outside imperial awareness, merchants, traders, information brokers. We exist in the spaces your husband's government ignores." "You're criminals. We're pragmatists." Alara's smile didn't reach her eyes. "And right now, we're the only people in this empire who want you alive and free." Serafina drank. The wine was good, expensive. "Your man on the road said there's a coup coming." "There is. Prove it." Alara gestured to the maps on the table. "The raids on your eastern territories weren't random. They were coordinated by someone with access to imperial military intelligence. Someone who knew exactly where your border defenses were weakest and exactly when to strike. That could be anyone with military training. It was Duke Castor Vale." Alara's voice was flat. "Your husband's closest military advisor. The man who's been positioning himself to seize power for the last 3 years. Serafina's blood went cold. Castor Vale, she knew him. Brilliant strategist, ruthless commander, ambitious enough to drink poison if it meant getting ahead. Lucian trusted him completely. "You're saying Castor orchestrated attacks that killed thousands of Imperial citizens just to create a crisis?" "I'm saying he created a crisis that will pull your husband's attention east while Castor's allies move against him in the capital." Alara leaned forward. "The raiders are real. The casualties are real. But the timing was engineered. And while Lucetien's mobilizing troops to deal with an external threat, Castor will consolidate support among nobles who've been waiting for an excuse to remove an emperor who's more interested in his mistress than governing. Lucien will see it coming. Wait. Atingam. Will he pay?" Alara's eyebrow lifted. "The same man who didn't notice his wife restructured 7 provincial trade systems? Who didn't hear you tell him about preventing a famine because he was reading correspondence? You think that man is paying attention to political maneuvering in his own court?" The words hit like blows. Because Alara was right. Lucien was brilliant at military strategy and absolutely blind to everything else. He'd never see a coup coming from his own inner circle. "Why tell me this?" Serafina asked. "What do you want?" "We want you to survive what's coming." Alara's expression was serious. "Because when Castor moves against Lucien, he'll eliminate anyone with a legitimate claim to imperial authority. That includes you, Especially you, since you have Northern Alliance blood and administrative skills that make you valuable to potential rivals. So you're protecting me out of pure altruism? We're protecting you because a queen who can walk away from her crown is a queen who might be useful to people operating outside traditional power structures. Ilara's smile was sharp. We're pragmatists, remember? Everything's a transaction. Serafina stared at her. What's your transaction? Simple. We keep you alive. In exchange, when this is over, you remember that we helped you. And when you have power again, and you will have power because women like you don't stay down, you remember that not everyone in this empire operates within your husband's systems. You want protection, legitimacy. We want acknowledgement that the empire is bigger than your capital and your nobles. Ilara's voice was steady. We want someone in power who understands that there are people out here making this realm work who've been invisible for years. Sound familiar? It did. God, it did. Serafina had been invisible for 5 years. These people had been invisible for generations. They'd built entire networks, entire economies, entire communities outside imperial awareness. They were doing exactly what she'd been doing, holding things together while being ignored. How long do I have? She asked. Before Castor moves? Days. Maybe a week. Ilara stood. Your husband will mobilize troops and head east. The moment he leaves the capital, Castor will make his play. Probably a council vote declaring Lucian unfit to rule due to failure to protect imperial citizens. Bloodless, legal, impossible to fight without triggering civil war. And Lucien? Exile if he's lucky, execution if he resists. Ilara's tone was matter of fact. Castor's been building support for years. Half the noble houses will back him. The other half will stay neutral rather than risk their own necks. Serafina's mind was racing. Lucien was about to lose everything. The throne he'd fought for, the empire he'd bled for, the power he'd prioritized over their marriage. Part of her wanted to let it happen, wanted to watch him lose what he'd chosen over her. But the larger part, the part that had spent 5 years actually running the empire while he chased glory, knew that if Castor took power, the realm would tear itself apart. Castor was ambitious, but not competent. He'd start wars he couldn't win, make enemies out of allies, fracture the stability Serafina had spent years building. Thousands more would die, provinces would starve, everything she'd worked for would burn. You want me to warn him? The realization tasted bitter. I want you to make a choice. Ilara's eyes were steady. You can stay here, safe and hidden, while your husband loses his throne. Or you can go back, warn him about Castor, and spend the rest of your life being the invisible queen who saved an empire for a man who doesn't deserve her. Those are terrible options. They're the only options you have. Ilara's voice softened slightly. Unless you want to consider a third path, which is, let Castor take the throne, let the empire fracture, and when the dust settles, build something new in the spaces between the broken pieces. Ilara gestured to the maps. These villages, these networks, these people who've been invisible for generations. They don't need an emperor. They need someone who understands what it means to hold things together from the shadows. Serafina stared at her. You're offering me what exactly? A different kind of crown? I'm offering you a different kind of power. Ilara's smile was cold. Not authority given by blood or marriage, but influence earned by actually making people's lives better. You've been doing it for 5 years in the capital. Imagine what you could do if you stopped worrying about legitimacy and started focusing on effectiveness. It was tempting, dangerously tempting. Walk away from Lucian, from the palace, from the entire imperial system. Build something new with people who actually valued her contribution. Stop being invisible and start being essential. But it would mean watching the empire burn, watching Castor's incompetence kill thousands, letting everything she'd built collapse because she chose herself over duty. I need time to think. You have until morning. Ilara moved toward the door. Get some sleep. We'll talk again when you're not half frozen and in shock. She left. The stranger, still unnamed, still watching from the shadows, remained by the door. Does she always offer people impossible choices? Serafina asked. Only the ones worth recruiting. His voice was neutral. For what it's worth, I've seen plenty of people in your situation. Most of them break. You're still thinking strategically instead of emotionally. That's rare. Maybe I'm just too tired to feel anything. Maybe. He tilted his head. Or maybe you spent 5 years learning to survive by shutting down emotion. Either way, you're good at it. Alara noticed. That's why she wants you.
Everyone wants me for something. Serafina's laugh was bitter. Lucien wanted me for the Northern Alliance. Castor probably wants me dead because I'm a political threat. Alara wants me for her shadow network. Does anyone in this entire empire just want me for who I actually am?
The stranger was quiet for a moment. Your handmaiden does. The duke who gave you your cloak. The people in the provinces you saved from starvation. He paused. And I think maybe you've spent 5 years being wanted for the wrong reasons and forgot that people have been seeing you the whole time. Just not the person you needed to see you most. The words hit harder than they should have. Serafina stood. Where can I sleep? Upstairs, second door on the left. He stepped aside. I'll be here if you need anything. She climbed the stairs, legs shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline crash. The room was simple. Bed, chair, window overlooking the village. She collapsed onto the mattress without bothering to undress. And for the first time since she'd removed her crown, Serafina let herself cry. She woke to shouting. Dawn light filtered through the window. Serafina rolled out of bed, instinct overriding exhaustion, and moved to the door. Downstairs, raised voices, Alara arguing with someone. The stranger's voice, sharp and commanding, then another voice. Familiar. Impossible. I know she's here. Stand aside or I'll burn this entire village to ash. Lucien. Serafina's heart slammed into her throat. She moved to the window, looked out, and saw what she'd been afraid of. Imperial soldiers, dozens of them, surrounding the village. Torches burning in the early morning light. And in the center, still dressed in the formal attire from the gala, looking like a war god who'd forgotten to sleep, was her husband. He'd found her. Serafina's mind raced. How? They'd covered their trail, taken paths that didn't exist. This village wasn't on Imperial maps, unless someone had told him where to look. She heard footsteps on the stairs, the door opened. Alara, expression grim. Your husband's downstairs demanding we hand you over. He's threatening to torch the village if we don't comply. How did he find me? Magic, or luck, or desperation, take your pick. Alara's voice was tight. What matters is he's here with enough soldiers to level this place. We need to decide how to handle this. Let me talk to him. Bad idea. He's not going to leave without me. Serafina moved toward the door. And he will burn this village. I've seen him raise cities for less strategic reasons. Let me talk to him before more people die because of me. Alara studied her. You're planning something. I'm planning to end this without casualties. Serafina's jaw was set. After that, I'll figure out the rest. She descended the stairs. The stranger was standing near the door, weapon drawn, ready to fight. Outside, she could hear Lucien shouting orders to his soldiers, counting down, giving them minutes to comply before he started burning. Serafina opened the door and stepped outside. The morning cold hit her like a fist. She stood in the doorway, still wearing the ice blue gown from the gala, hair loose around her shoulders, looking like exactly what she was, a queen who'd spent the night running. Lucien saw her, and everything about his expression shifted. Relief, fury, something else she couldn't name. He was across the distance between them before she could blink, grabbing her arm hard enough to bruise. What the hell were you thinking? His voice was low, dangerous. Running off into the night with no guards, no protection, while there are raiders killing people across the eastern provinces? I was thinking I needed to get away from you before I suffocated. Serafina's voice was steady. Let go of my arm. You embarrassed me in front of the entire court. You embarrassed yourself by bringing your mistress to the most important celebration of the year. She pulled free. I just stopped pretending not to notice. Lucien's jaw was tight. Behind him, his soldiers waited, hands on weapons. Behind her, Alara and her people prepared for a fight they couldn't win. We're leaving. Lucien's voice was flat. Right now, you're coming back to the palace and we're going to address the situation like adults instead of... Instead of what? Serafina cut him off. Instead of a wife who finally stopped accepting invisible as her permanent state? Instead of a queen who walked away from a marriage that's been dead for years? Our marriage is not dead. Her laugh was sharp. Lucien, you don't know what I did yesterday because you weren't listening.
You don't know that I've restructured half the empire because you've never asked. You don't know anything about me except that I'm useful for alliances and administration and playing decorative wife at public events. Our marriage has been dead since the day you told me it was political and nothing more. This is not the time. It's never the time. Something in her voice made him stop. That's the problem. There's never a right time to tell you that I'm drowning, that I've been drowning for 5 years while you've been too busy chasing war and women to notice. I notice? You notice when I'm useful. Serafina's eyes were cold. You notice when you need something from me. You notice when I'm gone because it creates a problem you have to solve. But you don't notice me, Lucian. You haven't noticed me in years. The soldiers were watching now, witnessing their emperor and empress tear each other apart in a village square. Lucian's expression was hard. Get on your horse. We're returning to the capital. Now. Why? The question was genuine. So I can watch you mobilize troops to fight raiders while your inner circle plots against you? So I can smile and wave while you take Leora to council meetings? So I can spend 5 more years being structurally necessary but personally irrelevant? What are you talking about? Duke Castor is planning a coup. The words fell like stones. The raids on the Eastern Territories were orchestrated by someone with access to imperial military intelligence, someone who knew exactly when and where to strike for maximum political impact. While you're distracted with the military crisis, Castor's consolidating support to move against you in the capital. Lucian went very still. That's impossible. Is it? Serafina's voice was quiet now. You trust him completely. Give him access to everything. Never question his advice. Castor's been positioning himself for years, and you've been too focused on external threats to notice the internal ones. You're making this up. I'm telling you what I learned last night from people who actually pay attention to what happens outside palace walls. She gestured to Alara and her network. These people know things your spies don't because they operate in spaces your government ignores. And they're telling you that if you march east to fight raiders, you'll come back to find Castor sitting on your throne. Lucien's jaw tightened. She could see him processing, calculating, trying to decide if this was truth or manipulation. Even if I believed you, he said slowly, why would you warn me? You just walked out on me, removed your crown, told the entire empire our marriage was over. Why would you care if I lose my throne? Because I care about the empire. Serafina's voice was steady. I care about the people who'll die in a civil war. I care about the provinces I've spent 5 years rebuilding. I don't care about you, Lucian, not anymore, but I care about what happens to the realm if Castor takes power. The words hung in the cold morning air. Lucian stared at her. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked uncertain. Not the emperor, not the general, just a man who'd been so focused on external conquest that he'd lost what mattered most. If I go back to the capital instead of east, he said quietly, the raiders will keep moving deeper into imperial territory. More people will die. If you don't go back, Castor will seize power and the entire empire will tear apart. Serafina met his eyes. You have to choose which crisis to address first. That's what being an emperor means, making decisions where every option costs lives. And you? His voice was rough. What are you going to do? I don't know. The honesty surprised her. I don't know if I'm coming back to the capital. I don't know if I'm staying here with people who actually see me as something other than a political asset. I don't know anything except that I'm done being invisible. Lucien's hand moved like he was going to reach for her, then stopped. Serafina, don't. She stepped back. Whatever you're about to say, don't. We've spent 5 years having the wrong conversations at the wrong times. I'm tired of it. I never meant for you to feel invisible. But I did. Her voice didn't waver. And intention doesn't change impact. You can't erase 5 years of neglect with an apology in a village square. The sun was rising now, burning off the morning mist. Lucien's soldiers were restless, waiting for orders. Alara's network watched from doorways and windows, ready to fight or flee, depending on what happened next. Come back to the capital with me. Lucien's voice was different now. Not commanding, asking. Help me deal with Castor. After that, we'll figure out the rest. The rest of what? Us. He looked at her properly for the first time in years. Our marriage. What we've become.
how to fix it. You can't fix what's already dead. Then we'll build something new. His expression was raw in a way she'd never seen. But I can't do this alone, Serafina. I can't hold the empire together and deal with a coup and fight raiders on 3 fronts without you. I need you. You need my skills. The correction was gentle, but firm. You need someone to handle the political maneuvering while you handle the military crisis. That's not the same as needing me. It's both. Lucian's voice was low. I've been an idiot. I got so caught up in being emperor that I forgot what it cost you to help me get there. I forgot that you're the reason half this empire still functions. I forgot... His voice cracked slightly. I forgot to see you. And I'm sorry. Serafina stared at him. 5 years. 5 years she'd waited to hear those words. And now that she finally had them, she didn't know if they meant anything. Your apology doesn't change what I've become, she said quietly. I'm not the woman you married. That woman died slowly over 5 years of being ignored. The person standing here now is someone different. Someone who walked away from her crown because she finally understood that staying was killing her. Then introduce me. Lucian's eyes held hers. Let me meet who you've become. Let me try to know you again. Why would I let you do that? Because despite everything, you just warned me about a coup. His voice was steady. You could have let Castor take me down. Could have watched me lose everything and called it justice. But you didn't. Which means somewhere under all that justified anger, you still give a damn about what happens to me. He was right. She hated that he was right. Serafina looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't seen before. Fear. Not of losing his throne, but of losing her. Of realizing too late that he'd destroyed the one thing in his life that actually mattered. If I come back, she said slowly, things change. I'm not your decorative wife anymore. I'm not the quiet administrator who fixes problems while you take credit. I'm not invisible. Agreed. If I come back, you end things with Leora, publicly. No ambiguity, no keeping her around for political cover or whatever excuse you've been using. Lucien's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Agreed. If I come back, you start seeing me as your actual partner instead of your useful accessory. That means listening when I talk, caring about what I've accomplished, treating me like I matter. I should have been doing that all along. Yes, Serafina's voice was cold. You should have. But better late than never, I suppose. She turned to Alara, who'd been watching the entire exchange with sharp interest. Thank you for the refuge and for the information. Alara nodded. Remember what I said about the third path. The offer stands. If you ever decide the Empire isn't worth saving, we'll be here. I'll remember. Serafina walked toward Lucien's horse. He moved to help her mount, but she was already up, settling into the saddle with the ease of someone who'd grown up riding. One more thing, she said, looking down at him. I'm keeping the people I saved from starvation alive. That's non-negotiable. Whatever military strategy you're planning, the eastern provinces don't get sacrificed because it's tactically convenient. Those provinces are where the raiders are hitting hardest. Then figure out how to protect them. Her voice was steel. I'm not negotiating on this, Lucien. Those are my people. They don't die because you can't fight a war without acceptable casualties. Lucien stared at her. Then slowly, he nodded. We protect the provinces. Good. Serafina gathered the reins. Now, let's go save your throne from the man you trusted more than your own wife. They rode out as the sun climbed higher, leaving Alara's hidden village behind. Lucien's soldiers fell into formation around them, silent witnesses to an empress who'd walked away from her crown and an emperor who'd spent the night tearing apart the countryside looking for her. The ride back was quiet. Lucien rode beside her, close enough to speak but not speaking. Serafina watched the landscape change as they approached the capital, her mind already working through the political nightmare waiting for them. Castor would be expecting Lucien to ride east to fight the raiders. He wouldn't be prepared for an emperor who'd turned around and come back to the capital. That gave them maybe a day of surprise before he adjusted his strategy. One day to identify Castor's allies, to secure loyalists, to build a case for treason that would hold up in front of the council. One day to save an empire from a coup while pretending their marriage hadn't just shattered in a village square. I meant what I said, Lucien spoke suddenly. About seeing you.
about changing. Words are easy. Serafina didn't look at him. Let's see if you can manage actions. I will. I hope so. Her voice was quiet. Because I'm not doing this again, Lucien. I'm not spending another 5 years being invisible while you figure out whether I'm worth noticing. This is your one chance, our one chance. After this, if things don't change, I'm gone, and I won't come back. Understood. They rode in silence the rest of the way, the capital rising before them like a monument to everything they'd both sacrificed for power. The palace was chaos when they arrived. Nobles gathered in anxious clusters, servants rushing between wings, soldiers preparing to mobilize. Word had spread about the queen's disappearance and the emperor's pursuit. Now both had returned, and the entire court was holding its breath waiting for the explosion. Serafina dismounted before anyone could help her. She walked into the palace with Lucien beside her, their entrance stopping every conversation in the main hall. Margot appeared, eyes red from crying, relief washing across her face. Your Majesty, thank God. I need you to do something for me. Serafina's voice was low. Find Duke Aldrich. Tell him I need to see him immediately, privately. My chambers. Margot nodded and disappeared. Lucien was already surrounded by generals demanding orders about the Eastern Front. Serafina left him to it and climbed the stairs to her wing, servants scattering out of her path. Her chambers looked exactly as she'd left them, crown still sitting on the vanity where she'd placed it before the gala. Gown laid out for an event that had exploded into scandal, everything frozen in the moment before she'd walked away. She changed quickly, trading the ice blue gown for something practical. Dark trousers, fitted jacket, boots designed for movement instead of ceremony. If she was going to help stop a coup, she wasn't doing it in formal attire. Aldrich arrived within minutes, closing the door behind him. The entire palace thinks you ran away to join a rebellion. His voice was dry. I assume the truth is more complicated? Always is. Serafina moved to her desk, pulling out maps of the capital. Duke Castor is planning to overthrow Lucien. The eastern raids were engineered to create a crisis. While Lucien was supposed to be distracted fighting raiders, Castor would have moved against him in the capital. Aldrich went pale. You're certain? Certain enough to come back and warn him instead of disappearing into the provinces and watching it happen. She marked locations on the map. We need to identify Castor's allies, figure out who's been positioned to support him when he makes his move. We have maybe 24 hours before he realizes Lucien isn't riding east in a just strategy. If you're wrong about this, I'm not. Serafina's voice was flat. I've spent 5 years watching nobles position themselves for power, while everyone else was distracted by more obvious problems. Castor's been building his network for years. I just didn't see it as a coup until someone pointed out the pattern. Aldrich studied the map. If he moves through council channels, he'll need majority support. That means at least 12 of the 23 voting nobles. We need to find out who's committed to him and who can be swayed. Or threatened. Serafina's smile was cold. I've been the nice queen for 5 years. Let's see how effective the mean one is. They worked for hours, building a list of names. Nobles who'd been receiving military appointments from Castor. Families whose finances suddenly improved around the time the Eastern defense systems were being restructured. Lords who'd been vocally critical of Lucien's recent policies while praising Castor's strategic genius. The pattern was clear once you knew to look for it. Twist. By nightfall, they had 14 names, 14 nobles who were probably committed to Castor's coup, which meant Lucien had 9 loyalists at most, and that was only if nobody else defected. He's got the votes, Aldrich said grimly. If Castor calls a council session and moves for a no-confidence declaration, he wins. Then we don't let him call a council session. Serafina stood. We move first. On what grounds? Suspicion of treason? On grounds of actual treason. She gathered the documents they'd compiled. These appointments, these financial irregularities, the defense system failures that allowed the raiders through. It's all circumstantial until you put it together. Then it's a pattern of deliberate sabotage. It's still not enough for an arrest. Then we get more. Serafina's eyes were hard. We find proof, or we force Castor to make a mistake. Either way, we move before he does. A knock at the door. Lucien entered without waiting for permission, looking exhausted and dangerous. We need to talk. His eyes moved between Serafina and Aldrich.
All of us. They moved to the war room, a space Serafina had been excluded from for most of their marriage. Maps covered the walls showing troop movements, supply lines, border vulnerabilities. This was Lucian's domain: military strategy, tactical planning, the art of controlled violence. I've been reviewing the Eastern defense systems. Lucien's voice was tight. The failures that allowed the raiders through weren't accidents. Someone deliberately weakened key positions right before the attack. Castor. Serafina laid out their evidence. It's all connected. The raids, the defense failures, the political positioning. He's been planning this for months. Lucien studied the documents, his expression growing darker. These appointments. These are all positions with access to military intelligence and troop movements. Exactly. Aldrich pointed to the map. If Castor controls these positions, he controls information flow about what's happening on the borders. He could have orchestrated the entire raid sequence while making it look like incompetence or bad luck. That bastard. Lucien's voice was deadly quiet. I trusted him, gave him access to everything. He counted on that. Serafina met his eyes. You're brilliant at military strategy, but you trust your inner circle absolutely. Castor exploited that, positioned himself as your most loyal advisor while building a network to replace you. Lucian's jaw was tight. How do we stop him? We move first. Serafina pointed to the list of names. These are his allies. We isolate them, arrest them on charges of conspiracy before they can coordinate a response, cut the head off the conspiracy before it can organize. That's 14 arrests. Aldrich's voice was careful. Arresting that many nobles at once will look like a purge. It could trigger exactly the kind of instability Castor wants. Then we don't arrest all of them. Serafina's mind was racing. We arrest Castor, publicly, with enough evidence that his allies can't defend him without implicating themselves, force them to distance themselves or go down with him. We still need hard evidence. Lucian's voice was frustrated. Everything we have is circumstantial. We can prove he had opportunity and access, but we can't prove he actually gave the orders. Then we get him to confess. Serafina's voice was cold. We set a trap. Make him think his coup is succeeding. Let him commit to his position publicly, then spring the evidence when he can't walk it back. The two men stared at her. That's dangerous, Aldrich said slowly. If it fails, we're in the same position we're in now. Serafina's eyes were hard. Except we'll have lost our element of surprise, so it can't fail. Lucien studied her face. What are you planning? You're going to announce you're riding east tomorrow to deal with the raiders personally. Serafina moved to the map, tracing supply routes. Big public declaration, full military mobilization, exactly what Castor's expecting. Make it look like you're falling into his trap. And then you don't leave. Her smile was sharp. You stage the departure, but circle back to the capital through back routes. Meanwhile, I call an emergency council session. Tell everyone the Emperor has left me in charge during the crisis. Castor will think his moment has come. He'll make his move. And walk right into us waiting for him. Lucien's expression shifted. That could work? It has to work. Serafina met his eyes. Because if it doesn't, you lose your throne, and I lose any chance of keeping this empire from tearing itself apart. They planned through the night. Every detail mapped out, every contingency addressed. By dawn, they had a strategy that was either brilliant or suicidal, and Serafina was too tired to figure out which. Lucien stood as the sun rose, moving to the window. I never wanted this, the paranoia, the politics, the constant threat of betrayal. But you wanted the throne. Serafina's voice was quiet. This is what thrones cost. I'm starting to understand that. He looked at her. Thank you for coming back, for warning me, for not letting me walk into this blind. Don't thank me yet. Serafina stood. Thank me when we've survived this. If we survive this, we will. Lucian's voice was certain. We've survived worse. Have we? Serafina moved toward the door, then stopped. Actually, I don't think we have. I think this is the worst it's ever been. But maybe that means we're finally done pretending and can start actually dealing with what we've become. She left before he could respond, heading to her chambers to prepare for the performance of her life. The announcement happened at noon. Full court assembled in the grand hall, Lucien in formal military attire, making a speech about duty and protection and riding east to personally command the defense against raiders. The nobles ate it up. This was the emperor, they understood. Military commander, war leader, man of action. He was doing exactly what they expected. Serafina stood beside him, playing her role perfectly. Supportive wife, steady presence, showing no sign that 24 hours ago she'd removed her crown and walked out on their marriage. As Lucien finished his speech, Serafina stepped forward. During the emperor's absence, I'll be assuming administrative control of the capital and council operations. Her voice carried across the hall. Any matters requiring imperial authority will come through my office until His Majesty returns. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was unusual, but not unprecedented. The empress taking temporary authority during a military crisis made sense. Serafina's eyes found Castor in the crowd, watched his expression shift, watched him process what this meant. The emperor leaving, the empress vulnerable, the moment finally arriving. She saw the exact second he decided to move, and she smiled. The trap was set. All they had to do now was survive what came next. The council chamber filled slowly over the next 2 hours. 23 nobles, each representing the most powerful families in the empire, each carrying enough political weight to shift the balance of power with a single vote. Serafina watched them enter from her position at the head of the table, the emperor's seat, which she occupied now in Lucien's absence. It felt wrong, like wearing someone else's skin, but she kept her spine straight and her expression neutral as Duke Castorvale entered last, his timing deliberate. He wanted everyone watching when he walked in, wanted them to see him confident, controlled, ready to take what he believed was already his. Their eyes met across the room. His smile was polite, empty, the kind powerful men wear when they're about to destroy you and want you to know it's nothing personal. Serafina smiled back. Let him think she was vulnerable. Let him think the empress playing at authority was an easy target. The meeting began with standard business: trade disputes, provincial complaints, resource allocation. Serafina handled each item efficiently, demonstrating the administrative competence everyone knew she possessed but rarely acknowledged. She could feel the room's tension building. They were all waiting for Castor to make his move. He waited until the agenda was nearly complete. Patient, strategic. Then he stood. Every head turned. Your Majesty, if I may. His voice was respectful, reasonable. I have a matter of urgent concern regarding imperial security. Proceed, Duke Castor. The recent attacks on our eastern territories represent a catastrophic failure of imperial defense. He moved around the table, commanding the room like he already owned it. Thousands of our citizens dead, multiple garrison towns destroyed, raiders penetrating deeper into imperial territory than any foreign force has managed in 50 years. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the nobles. He had their attention. These failures occurred under the current military command structure. Castor's voice hardened. Under leadership that has been distracted by personal matters, by inappropriate relationships that have consumed the emperor's attention while his people burned. The attack was smooth, criticizing Lucien's leadership while referencing his affair with Leora without saying her name directly, planting doubt while maintaining plausible deniability. Serafina kept her expression neutral. This was the opening move. Let him think it was working. Furthermore, Castor continued, the emperor's decision to ride east personally, leaving the capital vulnerable during a crisis, demonstrates a fundamental lack of strategic judgment. He's chasing glory on the battlefield while the empire crumbles behind him. The emperor is defending imperial citizens from attack. Serafina's voice was calm. That's hardly glory-seeking. Is it defense or is it distraction? Castor faced her directly now. We all know the emperor's marriage has been troubled. Perhaps he's using this military crisis as an excuse to avoid dealing with personal failures. The words landed like blows, publicly acknowledging what everyone whispered about privately, making their private dysfunction part of the official record. Serafina felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. So this was how he wanted to play it. Attack Lucien's competence while reminding everyone that the emperor couldn't even manage his own household. The emperor's personal life is not a matter for council discussion, she said evenly. It becomes a matter for council discussion when it affects his ability to lead. Castor's voice was harder now. when it results in catastrophic security failures that kill thousands, when it leaves the empire vulnerable to external threats and internal instability. Several nobles nodded. They were following his logic, falling into the trap he'd carefully constructed. "What exactly are you proposing, Duke Castor?" Serafina asked. This was it, the moment he'd been building toward. "I'm proposing that this council exercise its authority to declare Emperor Lucian temporarily unfit to rule." Castor's voice was steady. "That we establish a regency council to manage imperial affairs until such time as the military crisis is resolved and the emperor can demonstrate restored competence." The room erupted. Nobles shouting, arguing, some supporting the motion, others horrified by the suggestion. Serafina sat perfectly still, letting the chaos wash over her. She'd known this was coming, had planned for it. But hearing it spoken aloud, hearing someone casually discuss removing Lucian from power like it was a routine administrative matter, still felt like being stabbed. "This is treason," Duke Aldrich's voice cut through the noise. "You're proposing to overthrow a sitting emperor." "I'm proposing to save an empire from an emperor who's proven incapable of protecting it." Castor's tone was reasonable, patient. This is exactly what the council's oversight authority was designed for: checks and balances, ensuring that imperial power serves the realm's interests rather than personal vanity. And who would lead this regency council? Serafina's voice was quiet enough that the room fell silent to hear her. "You? I would serve the empire in whatever capacity the council deemed appropriate." Castor's smile was modest. "Along with other qualified nobles who have demonstrated competence in managing imperial affairs during crisis." Translation. He'd already lined up his allies, had positions promised, power distributed. This wasn't a spontaneous motion. This was a carefully orchestrated coup disguised as constitutional process. "Before we proceed with this discussion," Serafina said carefully, "I'd like to present some information the council should consider." She nodded to Aldrich, who began distributing documents. The evidence they'd compiled over the previous night. Military appointments, financial transfers, communications that showed pattern and planning. Castor's expression shifted, just slightly, just enough that Serafina knew he recognized what he was seeing. "These documents show a pattern of deliberate sabotage of Eastern defense systems." Serafina's voice was cold now. "Military positions filled with loyalists to a single noble house, financial irregularities in defense spending, communications that suggest coordination with the raiders rather than defense against them." The room went deadly quiet. "This is absurd." Castor's voice was sharp. "These documents prove nothing except that I've been doing my job as military advisor." "Your job was to protect imperial citizens." Serafina stood now, every inch the queen they'd all been ignoring for 5 years. "Instead, you orchestrated their deaths to create a crisis you could exploit. You weakened the Eastern defenses, fed intelligence to the raiders, and timed their attack to maximize political impact while minimizing actual military threat to the capital. You have no proof." "I have enough proof to warrant a full investigation." Serafina's eyes were ice. "And I'm exercising my authority as acting regent to order your immediate arrest on charges of treason, conspiracy, and murder of imperial citizens." Castor laughed, actually laughed. "You can't be serious. You think you have the authority to arrest me? You're a decorative empress playing at power while your husband abandons his post. I'm the acting regent with full imperial authority during the emperor's absence." Serafina's voice was steel. "And you're under arrest." Guards moved forward, but they stopped when Castor raised his hand. "I don't think so." His smile was cold now, all pretense of respect gone. "You see, Your Majesty, you've made a critical miscalculation. You assume the guards in this room answer to you." Serafina's blood turned to ice. The guards weren't moving to arrest Castor. They were moving to surround her. "Did you really think I'd walk into this room unprepared?" Castor's voice was almost gentle. "That I'd let you spring some desperate trap without having my own contingencies in place?" The world tilted. Serafina's mind raced, trying to process what was happening. The guards were supposed to be loyal to the throne. She'd confirmed their assignments, verified their commanders. "You've been very thorough, I'll give you that." Castor moved closer, casual and confident. "All those documents you compiled, all that evidence you think you have, very impressive work for a queen who's been invisible for 5 years.
How did you
know you were investigating me? His smile widened. Your Majesty, I've had people watching you since the moment you restructured the agricultural system. You've been too competent, too visible to the people, too dangerous to leave unchecked. Every move you've made, every reform you've pushed through, I've known about it. I've just been waiting for the right moment to remove you as a threat. The realization hit like a physical blow. He'd been planning this for years. Not just the coup against Lucienne, but the removal of Serafina herself. She'd thought she was invisible, irrelevant, ignored. But she'd been watched, studied, measured as a threat, and marked for elimination. The raids were real, Castor continued, almost conversationally. The deaths were real. But they weren't the point. The point was creating chaos, forcing Lucian to choose between multiple crises, and most importantly, forcing you to reveal yourself. Reveal myself, as someone capable of actual leadership. His voice was hard now. As long as you played the invisible wife, I could work around you. But the moment you started acting like a real empress, making decisions, commanding authority, standing up in council, you became a problem that needed to be solved. Serafina's hand moved toward the knife at her belt. The guard's weapons rose immediately. I wouldn't. Castor's tone was almost regretful. You're surrounded by men loyal to me. The council chamber doors are locked. No one's coming to save you, Your Majesty. Not your husband, who's currently riding into an ambush on the Eastern Road. Not Duke Aldrich, whose entire family is being detained as we speak. Not anyone. The words hit like hammer blows. Lucian riding into an ambush. Aldrich's family detained. This wasn't just a coup. This was systematic elimination of everyone who posed a threat. You're wondering how I knew your plans. Castor sat on the edge of the council table, relaxed as if they were discussing weather. How I knew Lucian was circling back instead of riding east. How I knew you'd compiled evidence. How I knew every move before you made it. He gestured, and someone stepped out of the shadows behind Serafina. Her heart stopped. Margot. Her handmaiden. Her friend. The woman who'd been with her since childhood, standing with Castor, wearing an expression that was neither apologetic nor conflicted, just cold, professional. No. The word came out broken. I'm afraid so. Castor's voice was almost sympathetic. Margot has been in my employment for 3 years. Everything you've said, every plan you've made, every vulnerable moment you've had, I've known about all of it. Serafina stared at Margot, at the woman she'd trusted with everything, the woman who'd seen her cry, seen her break, seen every moment of weakness over 5 years of invisible suffering. Why? The question was barely audible. Margot met her eyes. Because you were never going to win, Your Majesty. You were never going to be anything more than the Emperor's ignored wife. At least this way I was on the winning side. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, that for a moment Serafina couldn't breathe. This was worse than Lucien's neglect, worse than being invisible. This was being watched, studied, and betrayed by someone she'd considered family. Your husband is dead by now. Castor stood. The ambush on the Eastern Road was thorough. No survivors. By tomorrow, the Empire will mourn the loss of their emperor to raiders, and the Council will have no choice but to establish a regency to prevent complete collapse. You'll never get away with this. I already have. His voice was flat. The moment you walked into this room thinking you could outsmart me with evidence and traps, you played your hand too early, Your Majesty, and now you have nothing. The guards moved closer. Serafina's mind was racing, trying to find an exit that didn't exist. The room was locked. The guards were hostile. Her allies were compromised. Lucienne was riding into death. She'd lost. Completely. Absolutely. Take her to the tower. Castor's voice was casual. Keep her alive for now. We'll need her cooperation for the transition of power. A grieving widow supporting the new regent is a better story than a dead empress creating a martyr. The guards grabbed her arms. Serafina didn't fight. There was no point. She'd gambled everything on a trap that had been turned against her. She'd thought she was the hunter. She'd been the prey all along. They dragged her out of the council chamber, through corridors that had been her home for 5 years, past servants who looked away rather than meet her eyes. Everyone had known. Everyone had been waiting for this. The tower was in the oldest part of the palace, stone walls thick enough to muffle screams. A room where previous emperors had kept their enemies before deciding whether execution or exile served their purposes better. They threw her inside. The door slammed shut. Lock turning. Footsteps fading. Serafina stood in the darkness, feeling the full weight of her failure crushing down. Lucien was dead. Aldrich was compromised. Margot had betrayed her. Castor had won. Everything she'd fought for, everything she'd built, everything she'd tried to protect, gone. Destroyed by her own arrogance and thinking she could outmaneuver someone who'd been planning this for years. She'd walked away from her crown thinking it was liberation, but she'd only made herself vulnerable, given Castor the opening he needed, proven that an invisible queen was safer than a visible one, because the moment she'd tried to matter, she'd been eliminated. She sank to the floor, back against cold stone, and let herself feel the full scope of the catastrophe. 5 years of being invisible. 1 night of being seen. And now she was locked in a tower while the empire burned around her. The worst part was knowing that if she'd just stayed invisible, none of this would have happened. If she'd kept playing the decorative wife, kept fixing problems in silence, kept pretending she didn't mind being irrelevant, Castor would have ignored her the same way Lucien had. She would have been alive and free even if she was drowning. But she'd wanted more. She'd wanted to be seen, to matter, to be something other than furniture. And it had destroyed everything. Hours passed. Serafina sat in darkness, mind cycling through the same thoughts on repeat, looking for the mistake she'd made, the moment where everything had gone wrong, the choice that had led to this. But there wasn't one moment. There was a pattern, a lifetime of being taught to be useful without being visible, to serve without demanding recognition, to sacrifice without expecting anything in return. She'd spent 5 years perfecting invisible competence. And the moment she'd tried to be visibly competent, the Empire had reminded her exactly what happened to women who stopped accepting their assigned place. A sound at the door, key turning. Serafina stood, preparing herself for whatever came next. The door opened. A figure stepped inside, backlit by torchlight from the corridor. Not a guard. Not Castor. Leora. Lucien's mistress, wearing a cloak that suggested she'd come here in secret, expression unreadable in the shadows. They stared at each other. The wife and the mistress. The invisible queen and the visible favorite. 2 women whose lives had been defined by the same man's choices. I'm not here to gloat. Leora's voice was softer than Serafina expected. I'm here because I made a choice, and I need you to understand why. What choice? To help you escape. Leora stepped fully into the room. Before Castor decides a dead empress is cleaner than a cooperative one. Serafina's mind reeled. Why would you help me? Because Lucien isn't dead. Leora's words came fast, urgent. The ambush failed. He's alive, and he's coming back to the capital with what's left of his forces. But he's walking into a trap he doesn't see. Castor has control of the city guard, the palace, half the noble houses. Lucien shows up thinking he's retaking his throne and he'll be cut down before he reaches the palace gates. Why are you telling me this? Because I care about him. Leora's voice cracked. I know you don't believe that. I know you think I'm just the woman who took your husband, but I care about him, and he's about to get himself killed because he thinks he's rescuing you. The words hung in the darkness. Serafina's heart was pounding. Lucien alive, coming back, walking into certain death. Even if I could escape, Serafina said slowly, what could I do? I have no allies, no resources, no authority. I'm just a queen who got outmaneuvered by someone smarter. You're more than that. Leora's voice was fierce. Everyone knows it. The people love you. The provinces you saved worship you. The reforms you pushed through changed thousands of lives. You're not invisible, Serafina. You're the only person in this empire who's been actually governing while everyone else played politics. That didn't stop Castor from beating me. It didn't stop him from beating the version of you who was playing by imperial rules. Leora grabbed her arm. But what if you stopped playing by those rules? What if you became the thing every noble in this palace fears most? A queen who has nothing left to lose. Serafina stared at her. At this woman she'd spent 3 years hating, this woman who'd taken everything Serafina wanted and was now offering her a way out. Why are you really doing this? She asked quietly. The truth. Leora was silent for a long moment. Then,
Because I've watched you for 3 years. Watched you hold this empire together while Lucienne chased me. Watched you fix problems no one else would touch. Watched you be invisible because you were too competent to ignore and too inconvenient to acknowledge. Her voice dropped. And I've watched myself become the woman who helped him ignore you. I don't know if I can fix that, but I can at least keep you from dying for the crime of finally demanding to be seen. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to Serafina in years. How do I get out? Leora produced a key. Servant passages, I know them all. Castor's focused on the main palace, the gates, the official routes. He's not watching the way servants move through walls. We can get you out of the palace, out of the capital. After that, you're on your own. Where would I go? Anywhere Castor isn't looking. Leora opened the door carefully, checking the corridor. East, toward the provinces you saved. South, toward the coastal territories. Anywhere people remember what you did for them instead of what the capital says you are. Serafina's mind was racing. Escape meant abandoning Lucien, meant running while he walked into a trap, meant becoming a fugitive instead of a queen. But staying meant death. Or worse, meant being Castor's puppet, legitimizing his coup with her presence and cooperation. If I run, she said slowly, Lucien dies. Castor will kill him the moment he reaches the capital. If you stay, you both die. Leora's voice was flat. At least if you run, you might live long enough to matter again, to do something other than be a corpse that validates a tyrant. The choice was impossible. Run and live as a fugitive, stay and die as a failure. Either way, everything she'd built would crumble, except the provinces. Serafina's voice was quiet. The territories I restructured, they're thriving now. They have resources, organization, loyalty. If I could reach them, you'd have an army. Leora's smile was grim. An army built on gratitude instead of duty. People who'd fight for you because you saved their lives instead of because you wear a crown. That's treason. Open rebellion against imperial authority. Imperial authority just tried to kill you and did kill thousands of civilians to stage a coup. Leora's voice was hard. At what point does survival stop being treason and start being justice? Serafina stared at her. This was the edge, the moment where she stopped being a queen trying to save an empire and became something else entirely. A rebel, an insurgent, a woman who'd been pushed so far outside the system that the only way back was to burn it down and build something new. The servant passages, she said finally. Show me. They moved through the palace like ghosts. Leora led them through passages Serafina had never known existed. Behind walls, beneath floors, through spaces designed for servants to move invisibly while nobles pretended they didn't exist. Ironic, Serafina thought. She'd been invisible for 5 years. Now, invisibility was saving her life. They reached the outer walls as dawn broke. Leora produced clothes, servant garb, plain and forgettable. Serafina changed quickly, shedding the Empress for something that would let her disappear into crowds. There's a merchant caravan leaving through the east gate in an hour. Leora pressed coin into her hand. They're heading toward the territories you restructured. Tell them you're looking for work. They'll take you. What about you? I'm going back. Leora's smile was sad. Someone needs to warn Lucien what he's walking into, even if he doesn't listen, even if I can't stop him from trying to be a hero. He'll get himself killed. Probably, Leora's voice cracked. But at least he'll die knowing someone tried to save him. That's more than most emperors get. They stood at the edge of the palace grounds, the city spreading before them in the early morning light. Two women whose lives had been destroyed by the same systems of power, the wife and the mistress, the invisible and the visible. Thank you. Serafina's voice was quiet. For this, for telling the truth, for caring about him even though I spent 3 years hating you for it. You had every right to hate me. Leora met her eyes. I was the easy target, the woman who took him. Easier to hate me than to admit he was never really yours to begin with. The words should have hurt. They didn't. They were just true. If I survived this, Serafina said slowly, if I managed to build something out of the wreckage, I'll remember what you did. If you survive this, Leora replied,
Make sure what you build is worth what it cost. She turned and disappeared back into the servant passages, leaving Serafina alone at the edge of everything she'd ever known. The city was waking up. Merchants opening shops, servants starting their rounds, guards changing shifts. Normal people living normal lives while the empire tore itself apart around them. Serafina pulled the servant's cloak tighter and walked toward the east gate, toward the provinces she'd saved, toward the only people who might remember her as something other than the emperor's forgotten wife. She'd spent 5 years being invisible, 5 years being useful without being seen, 5 years perfecting the art of mattering without anyone noticing. Now she was invisible again. But this time, she chose it. This time, it was armor instead of prison. She'd lost everything: her crown, her position, her safety. Her husband was walking into death. Her empire was controlled by a traitor. Her only ally was the woman who'd slept with her husband. But she was alive. She was free. And she had nothing left to lose. Which meant for the first time in her life, she had everything to gain. The merchant caravan was exactly where Leora said it would be. Serafina approached carefully, keeping her face down, her posture submissive. "Looking for passage east," she said quietly to the caravan master. He looked her over, saw servant clothes, tired eyes, a woman running from something. "Can you work?" "I can manage accounts, handle negotiations, read and write in 4 languages. His eyebrow rose. "You're overqualified for servant work." "I'm willing to be underpaid for it." She met his eyes. "I just need to get away from the capital." Quietly. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "We leave in an hour. Stay out of sight until then. And whatever you're running from, it stays outside my caravan. Understood?" "Understood." She climbed into the back of a supply wagon, settling among grain sacks and trade goods. The city walls were visible through the canvas, the palace rising above everything, symbol of power and empire. She'd lived there for 5 years, been married there, crowned there, slowly destroyed there. And now she was leaving, not as a queen, but as a fugitive. Not with an army, but with nothing. The caravan began to move. The city fell away behind them. The palace became a distant shape against the sky. Serafina watched it disappear and felt something break and reform inside her chest. She'd been Queen Serafina Vale, wife of the emperor, invisible administrator, useful furniture. She didn't know what she'd become next, but it wouldn't be invisible. It wouldn't be useful. It wouldn't be anything she'd been before. Because the woman who'd spent 5 years dying slowly to keep an empire alive was gone, and the woman who'd survived betrayal, coup, and systematic destruction was just getting started. The eastern provinces waited ahead. The people she'd saved. The loyalty she'd earned without even knowing it. If the empire wanted her back, they'd have to come find her. And when they did, they'd discover that the invisible queen had learned something essential during her years of being ignored. Power didn't come from crowns or thrones or imperial authority. It came from people who believed you were worth following into fire. And Serafina had just spent 5 years earning that kind of power while everyone else was busy playing politics. Now it was time to collect. The eastern provinces smelled like hope mixed with exhaustion. Serafina had forgotten what that combination felt like, the way people moved when they believed tomorrow might actually be better than today, even while their bodies carried the weight of surviving yesterday. 3 weeks on the road. 3 weeks of sleeping in merchant wagons, working as a traveling accountant, keeping her face down and her identity buried under layers of deliberate anonymity. 3 weeks of watching the provinces she'd restructured from a distance, seeing them thrive in ways the capital never acknowledged. The caravan stopped in a town called Riverside, one of the first places Serafina had opened direct trade routes to 2 years ago. It had been dying then. Corrupt nobles hoarding grain, merchants inflating prices, families choosing which children to feed because there wasn't enough for everyone. Now it was alive. Market stalls overflowing with goods. Children who looked healthy instead of hollow. Buildings repaired, streets maintained, people moving with purpose instead of desperation. This was what she'd built. Not with crown or throne or imperial authority, with logistics and trade routes and the stubborn refusal to accept that starvation was inevitable. The caravan master paid her in coin and supplies. She thanked him, gathered her things, and walked into the market square like she belonged there. Because she did, more than she'd ever belonged in the palace. She was looking for food when someone grabbed her arm. Serafina's hand went to the knife at her belt, muscle memory from weeks of traveling alone through unstable territory. But the grip was gentle, urgent rather than threatening. An older woman, maybe 60, face weathered by sun and work. She was staring at Serafina with an expression that made her blood run cold. Recognition. Your Majesty. The woman's voice was barely a whisper. Saints preserve us. It's really you? Serafina's mind raced. Deny it. Walk away. Disappear before this became a problem. But the woman's eyes were filling with tears. You saved my grandchildren, she said quietly. 2 years ago, when you restructured the grain trade, my daughter's family was starving. We were choosing which babies to feed, and then the caravans came. Direct from the capital, prices we could afford, no corrupt middlemen. My grandchildren lived because of you. The words hit like physical blows. Serafina had known intellectually that her reforms saved lives, had seen the numbers, the statistics, the reports proving impact. But standing in front of someone whose grandchildren were alive because of decisions she'd made in palace offices, that was different. That was real in a way nothing in the capital had ever been real. I'm not... Serafina started to deny it. Please. The woman's grip tightened. You're in danger here. Everyone knows what happened in the capital. The coup. The emperor's supposed death. The new regent. Word spreads fast in the provinces. There are soldiers looking for you. Castor's soldiers. Imperial guards, but everyone knows they're really his now. The woman glanced around, checking who might be listening. Come with me, quickly, before someone sees you who shouldn't. Serafina let herself be pulled through the market, into a side street, then through a door into a small house that smelled like bread and herbs. The woman locked the door behind them, drew the curtains, then turned to face Serafina properly. My name is Elena. My family has lived in Riverside for 4 generations. Her voice was steady now, practical. We owe you everything, so I'm going to tell you something you need to know, and then you're going to decide what to do with it.
What happened? The Emperor's alive. Elena moved to the table, pulling out a map. The ambush on the eastern road failed. He made it back to the capital 3 days ago with what was left of his personal guard, maybe 50 men. He tried to retake the palace. Serafina's heart slammed into her throat. Tried? Castor was waiting, had the palace locked down, the city guard in position, everything prepared. They fought in the main square, dozens dead. Lucian and his men were driven back toward the eastern districts. Elena's finger traced paths on the map. He's holed up in the old fortress near the river, surrounded, cut off from supply lines. Castor's waiting him out. Couple more days and they'll starve or surrender. Why hasn't Castor just stormed the fortress? Because Lucien still has loyalists in the capital, noble families who haven't committed to either side yet. If Castor kills the emperor in direct assault, it could trigger the civil war he's been trying to avoid. Elena looked up. He needs Lucien to surrender or die quietly. Either way, clean and without martyrdom. Serafina's mind was racing. Lucien alive, trapped, running out of time. Why are you telling me this? Because word's been spreading through the provinces. Elena's voice dropped. About you. About what you did for us. About how you were betrayed, locked up, barely escaped with your life. People are angry, Your Majesty. They're ready to do something about it. Do what? March on the capital? If you ask them to. Elena's expression was serious. The merchants you helped, the farmers whose lives you saved, the families who have food now because of your reforms, they remember, and they're willing to fight for the woman who fought for them. It was insane. A provincial uprising led by a fugitive empress against imperial forces. They'd be slaughtered. Untrained civilians with farming tools against professional soldiers. Except, how many? Serafina asked quietly. In Riverside? Maybe 500 who could fight. More if we count surrounding villages. Elena's smile was grim. Multiply that across all 7 provinces you restructured, and you're looking at thousands. Not an army, exactly, but not nothing either. Serafina stared at the map, at the capital, at the fortress where Lucien was trapped. She'd run from the palace thinking she'd lost everything, but she'd been building something without realizing it. Not power based on crowns or bloodlines, power based on something far more dangerous, gratitude.
Loyalty earned through action instead of inherited through birth. The kind of power that made desperate people willing to march into certain death because someone had finally given a damn whether they lived.
I can't ask them to fight, Serafina said. They're not soldiers. They'll die. They're already dying. Elena's voice was flat. Castor's consolidating power. First thing he did was roll back half your reforms, brought back the grain monopolies, reinstated the corrupt nobles, closed the direct trade routes. Prices are already climbing. In 6 months, we'll be back where we started, starving, desperate, watching our children die. So this is survival, not loyalty. It's both. Elena met her eyes. You gave us a chance to live. Now we're giving you a chance to fight back. Whether you take it or not is your choice, but you should know people are gathering in every province you touched. They're waiting for word from you, waiting to know if the queen who saved them is willing to save herself. The weight of it settled on Serafina's shoulders. She'd spent 5 years being invisible, 3 weeks being a fugitive. And now suddenly she was being offered the one thing she'd never had in the capital, an army that actually wanted her to lead them. If I do this, she said slowly, if I march on the capital with provincial forces, it's treason, open rebellion, civil war. It's already civil war. Elena's voice was hard. Castor started it when he orchestrated those raids, killed thousands, and staged a coup. You're just the first person willing to fight back. Serafina looked at the map, at the fortress, at Lucian trapped inside with 50 men and no way out. 3 weeks ago, she'd removed her crown and walked away thinking she was choosing freedom. But she'd just been running, surviving instead of fighting, becoming invisible again because visible had gotten too dangerous. But the woman who'd restructured 7 provinces hadn't been invisible. The woman who'd saved 40,000 people from starvation hadn't been running. That woman had looked at systems designed to hurt people and decided to break them. That woman had been dangerous, effective, worth following into fire. Maybe it was time to remember how to be her again. Tell them I'm coming, Serafina said. Tell them to gather everyone willing to fight. We move in 3 days. Elena's smile was fierce. What do we tell them we're fighting for? Tell them we're fighting to take back what's ours. Serafina's voice was steady. Tell them the invisible queen is done hiding. Months. The next 72 hours were chaos wrapped in desperate planning. Serafina moved through the provinces like a ghost made solid, appearing in markets and town squares, speaking to people who thought she was dead or captured or broken. She told them the truth. All of it. The failed marriage, the years of invisibility, the betrayal, the escape. She didn't dress it up or make herself heroic, just gave them the raw facts of a woman who'd tried to matter and been systematically destroyed for it. And then she told them what came next. Castor wants me dead because I'm inconvenient. Wants you quiet because you're profitable when you're desperate. Her voice carried across a crowd in the town of Millstone. I'm done being convenient, and you're done being quiet. If you want to fight back, if you want to protect what we built together, then gather your people and meet me at the Northern Ford in 2 days. If not, stay safe. Stay alive. No judgment either way. Everywhere she went, people gathered. Not because she was queen, crowns meant nothing to them. Because she'd proven she gave a damn whether they lived or died. And in a world where most nobles treated them like resources to be extracted, that kind of caring was revolutionary. They came. Farmers with scythes, merchants with crossbows, blacksmiths who knew how to forge weapons, women who'd learned to fight because the alternative was watching their families starve, children barely old enough to hold a blade who were tired of watching their parents break. Not an army, a movement. By the time Serafina reached the Northern Ford, she had 3,000 people behind her, untrained, under-equipped, absolutely determined. And standing at the edge of the camp, watching her approach with an expression that mixed horror and admiration, was Duke Aldrich Thorne. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks, face haggard, clothes travel-worn, sword at his hip like he'd been expecting to use it. Your Majesty, his voice was rough. I heard rumors you were dead. I heard the same about you. Serafina dismounted. How did you get away from Castor? I didn't. Aldrich's smile was grim. He had my family detained, leverage to ensure my cooperation. But my daughter's more clever than he anticipated. She got them out,
Got word to me. We've been running ever since. And you came here? Where else would I go? He gestured to the gathering crowd. You're the only person in this empire actually doing something instead of choosing sides and hoping for the best. Serafina studied him. How many nobles escaped? A dozen families, maybe less. Everyone else either bent the knee to Castor or is staying neutral and waiting to see who wins. His expression was bitter. Loyalty only extends as far as survival in the capital. How many soldiers? Maybe 200 who stayed loyal to Lucian. They're scattered, hiding in the countryside, waiting for someone to rally behind. Aldrich paused. They'd follow you, if you asked. Why would they follow me? I'm not a military commander. You're the woman who just raised 3,000 provincial fighters in less than a week. Aldrich's voice was flat. Castor has professional soldiers and institutional support. You have people willing to die for you because you gave them a reason to live. That's more dangerous than any army. The camp was taking shape around them. Cook fires, supply tents, weapon sharpening. People who'd spent their lives being ignored finally visible in their determination to fight back. We're marching on the capital tomorrow, Serafina said quietly. Straight to the fortress where Lucian's trapped. We break the siege, extract him and his men, and fall back to defensible territory. That's suicide. Aldrich's voice was careful. Castor has the entire capital garrison. Thousands of trained soldiers. Your people are farmers with scythes. My people are survivors who've learned that dying on their feet is better than living on their knees. Serafina met his eyes. And they're led by a woman who spent 5 years being invisible and just discovered that visible is far more dangerous than anyone anticipated. You'll lose. Probably. Her smile was sharp. But Castor will discover that victory against someone with nothing to lose costs more than he wants to pay. They marched at dawn. 3,000 provincial fighters, 200 scattered soldiers, a dozen noble families. Against the full might of imperial forces loyal to a usurper with control of the capital. Serafina rode at the front, wearing armor borrowed from a blacksmith in Riverside. No crown, no royal insignia, just practical steel and determination. The capital rose before them as the sun climbed higher. Walls that had protected the empire for centuries now, protecting the man who destroyed it from within. Castor's forces were waiting. Of course they were. He'd known she'd come. Had probably been counting on it. The imperial garrison stood in formation outside the walls. Thousands of professional soldiers in perfect ranks, cavalry on the flanks, archers positioned on the walls. It should have been intimidating. It was designed to be intimidating. But Serafina had spent 3 weeks learning that people who've survived starvation don't intimidate easily. She rode forward alone, stopping just within shouting distance of Castor's lines. A single rider appeared from the imperial forces to meet her. Not Castor. One of his generals. A man named Vex who'd served under Lucien for years before deciding that loyalty was less profitable than betrayal. Your Majesty. His voice was mocking. I'd heard you were dead. This is unexpected. I've been busy. Serafina kept her voice steady. Building an army from people your new master thought were beneath notice. That's not an army. That's a mob with farming tools. And yet here I am, marching on your gates, making you commit forces to stop me. Her smile was cold. Funny how mobs with farming tools can become inconvenient when they stop accepting invisible as their permanent state. Vex's expression hardened. Turn around now, and I'll let your people return to their provinces alive. Keep pushing, and I'll cut them down where they stand. You could try. Serafina's voice was flat. But you'll discover that people fighting for survival are harder to kill than people fighting for a paycheck. Every one of my fighters has a reason to be here. Can your soldiers say the same? The question hung in the air. They both knew the answer. Professional soldiers followed orders. But orders stopped mattering when the people giving them looked like they might lose. Last chance, Vex said. Walk away. No. Serafina turned her horse. Tell Castor the invisible queen says hello, and tell him I'm coming for what's mine. She rode back to her lines as Vex returned to his. Both armies stood facing each other, waiting for someone to break. Serafina dismounted, walking among her people. They were terrified. She could see it in their eyes, their shaking hands, the way they gripped weapons they barely knew how to use. They were going to die today, most of them, maybe all of them. I won't lie to you, she said, voice carrying across the assembled fighters. We're outnumbered, outmatched, facing professional soldiers while most of you have never held a weapon. This is going to be brutal and most of us won't survive it.
The brutal honesty rippled through the crowd, but nobody ran. But here's what they don't understand, Serafina continued. They're fighting because someone ordered them to. You're fighting because you chose to. They're protecting a system that treats you like resources. You're protecting each other. They think they can intimidate you into submission. You've already survived things scarier than their formations.
She met eyes across the crowd, saw people who'd buried children, lost homes, survived horrors that soft nobles couldn't imagine. The capital thinks we're nothing, farmers and merchants and invisible people who don't matter. Her voice hardened. Let's show them exactly how dangerous nothing can be when it stops accepting invisibility. The roar that went up was primal. Not trained, not disciplined, just pure, desperate determination from people who'd decided that dying while fighting back was better than living while crushed down. Serafina remounted, raising her borrowed sword. For everyone who told you that you didn't matter, the charge began before she finished. 3,000 people surging forward with everything they had. No formations, no strategy, just momentum and fury and the kind of recklessness that comes from having nothing left to lose. The Imperial lines braced for impact. The collision was chaos, steel against steel, training against desperation. Professional soldiers cutting through provincial fighters who kept coming anyway because stopping meant going back to starvation. Serafina fought like she'd never fought before. Not with skill, she had none. With pure survival instinct. Blocking, dodging, striking at anything that came within reach. Around her, people were dying. Her people. Falling with weapons in hand because they'd chosen this death over the slow death of giving up. The battle was a nightmare. Hours of blood and screaming and watching people she'd saved from starvation die trying to save her back. The Imperial forces were better trained, better equipped, better organized, but they were fighting for pay. Her people were fighting for survival. And survival made people do impossible things. The line held, barely, then pushed forward. Inch by bloody inch, provincial fighters driving into Imperial formations through sheer momentum. Not winning, they were dying in droves. But not breaking. Because broken people who've survived the capital's neglect don't break easily a second time. Serafina lost track of time, fought until her arms screamed, watched Aldrich cut down soldiers who'd served with him for years. Saw farmers she'd shared meals with fall with weapons they'd learned to use 3 days ago. Then the fortress gate opened. Lucien emerged with his 50 remaining men, hitting the Imperial forces from behind. Trapped between Serafina's desperate charge and the Emperor's trained fighters, Castor's lines finally cracked. The retreat was orderly at first, then panicked, then full rout as Imperial soldiers realized they were fighting two forces simultaneously. Serafina pushed through the chaos toward the fortress, blood on her face and borrowed armor dented beyond repair. Lucien was there, fighting like the war god he'd always been, cutting through soldiers with brutal efficiency. Their eyes met across the battlefield. For one moment, everything else stopped. The husband she'd walked away from. The emperor she'd saved despite everything. The man who'd spent 5 years ignoring her and now looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Serafina. His voice was raw. Not now. She gestured to the fighting. We're not done yet. Castor's forces were regrouping on the walls, archers taking position. This wasn't over. This was barely started. A horn sounded from the eastern road. Everyone froze. More soldiers approaching. Thousands of them. Banners flying. But not Castor's banners. Serafina's heart stopped. The Northern Alliance, her family's forces, the territories she'd been raised in before marrying Lucien, they'd come. At their head rode a figure Serafina recognized immediately, her brother Marcus, commanding the Northern Cavalry like he'd been born to it. He reached the battlefield and surveyed the carnage. Then his eyes found Serafina, bloodied and exhausted and still standing. His smile was fierce. Sorry we're late. Had to ride hard when we heard our sister was starting a war without us. Marcus. Serafina's voice broke. You saved 7 provinces from starvation, he said simply. You think we'd let you fight alone? The northern forces moved into position. Fresh troops, trained cavalry, military support that shifted the entire balance of power. On the walls, Castor appeared, staring down at the combined forces arrayed against him, provincial fighters, imperial loyalists, and now the Northern Alliance. He'd miscalculated, badly. "Surrender," Seraphina's voice carried across the battlefield. "You've lost, Castor. End this before more people die."
I haven't lost anything. His voice was sharp. I control the capital, the treasury, the institutional power of the empire. You have farmers and borrowed troops. I have people willing to die for something that matters. Seraphina's voice was cold. You have soldiers reconsidering whether your paycheck is worth fighting against their own families.
It was true. She could see it in the imperial lines, soldiers looking at the provincial fighters, recognizing faces from villages they'd been raised in, questioning whether defending a usurper was worth killing their own people. "This isn't over," Castor shouted. "I'll burn this capital before I surrender it." An arrow took him in the shoulder. He staggered, grabbing the wall for support. Behind him, his own guards were lowering their weapons. They were done. The coup was over. Seraphina dismounted, legs shaking from exhaustion. Lucien was beside her immediately, catching her before she fell. "I've got you," he said quietly. "I don't need you to catch me." Her voice was raw. "I've been catching myself for weeks." "I know." His eyes held hers. "I know you have. And I'm sorry it took me this long to see it." Around them, the battlefield was quieting, Castor's forces surrendering, provincial fighters collapsing from exhaustion, the aftermath of a war that had been won through desperation and impossible determination. "We need to talk," Lucien said. "About everything. About us. About what happens next." "Not yet." Seraphina pulled away, moving toward her people. The ones still standing, the ones bleeding, the ones who'd marched into certain death because she'd asked them to. She needed to see them, needed to acknowledge what they'd sacrificed, needed to make sure they knew their lives mattered more than imperial politics. "Seraphina," Lucien's voice behind her. "Not yet," she repeated. "First I take care of the people who were willing to die for me. Then we figure out what's left of us." She walked into the crowd of exhausted fighters, helping the wounded, honoring the dead, making sure everyone understood that their sacrifice wasn't invisible. Because she'd spent 5 years being invisible, and she'd be damned if she let anyone else suffer the same fate. The capital was secure, Castor was captured, the coup was defeated. But the hardest battle was still ahead, because now Seraphina had to decide what she wanted to be. The invisible queen who'd won through suffering, the visible rebel who'd raised an army from nothing, or something else entirely, something the Empire had never seen before. A woman who'd been broken by the system and rebuilt herself outside it, who'd learned that power didn't come from crowns, but from caring whether people lived or died, who'd discovered that the most dangerous thing in any empire wasn't the strongest soldier or the smartest politician. It was someone with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Lucien stood watching her move among her people, and for the first time in their marriage, he looked afraid, not of losing his throne, of losing her. Because the woman he'd ignored for 5 years had become someone far more powerful than the decorative wife he'd married, and whether she chose to stay or walk away again would determine not just their future, but the future of the entire empire. The sun was setting over the capital, bodies being cleared from the battlefield, wounded being treated, victory tasting like ash and blood and impossible survival. And Seraphina stood at the center of it all, no longer invisible, no longer ignored, finally free to choose what came next. The Empire held its breath, waiting to see what the woman who'd been invisible for 5 years would do now that everyone was finally watching. The palace throne room had been cleaned of blood, but not memory. Seraphina stood at the base of the dais where she'd been crowned 5 years ago, staring at the chair Lucien had occupied while slowly forgetting she existed. The afternoon light came through stained glass windows, painting everything in colors that felt too beautiful for what this room had witnessed. Behind her, the doors opened. She didn't turn. Knew the footsteps. Lucien stopped a few feet away, close enough to speak, far enough that she could still choose distance if she wanted it. "The council's assembled," he said quietly. "They're waiting for us." "Let them wait." Seraphina's voice was flat. "I've spent 5 years waiting for people who treated me like furniture. They can manage an hour." He was silent for a long moment, then, "I deserve that." "You deserve worse." She finally turned to face him. He looked older,
The siege, the battle, the near death had carved lines into his face that hadn't been there before. But I'm too tired to give you what you deserve, so let's just deal with what's necessary and move on. Sarah, don't call me that. The old nickname felt like a weapon being used against her. You lost the right to familiarity when you spent 3 years bringing your mistress to state dinners while I ate alone.
Lucian's jaw tightened. I know I failed you. I know I took you for granted, ignored your contributions, treated you like you were invisible. You didn't treat me like I was invisible. Serafina's voice was quiet now. Dangerous. You made me invisible. There's a difference. Invisible is a state of being. You actively chose not to see me, chose to prioritize everything else. War, politics, another woman, over the person holding your empire together. I was wrong. Yes, you were. She moved past him toward the windows. But being wrong doesn't fix 5 years of damage, doesn't resurrect the woman I was before you slowly killed her with neglect. Then let me meet who you've become. His voice was raw. I spent 3 days in that fortress thinking I'd lost you, that you died because I was too blind to see what Castor was planning, too arrogant to believe someone could outmaneuver me because I was so focused on external threats that I ignored the internal ones. Sounds familiar. Serafina's smile was bitter. That's exactly how you treated our marriage, so focused on being emperor that you forgot you had a wife. I didn't forget it. Yes, you did. She turned to face him fully now. You forgot I existed as anything other than a political asset and administrative convenience. You forgot that I was a person with needs and feelings and a soul that was dying inch by inch while you chased glory and Lyora. The name hung between them. Neither had spoken it directly since the battle. Lyora's gone, Lucian said quietly. Left the capital the day after the siege ended. Said she didn't belong here anymore. She saved my life. Serafina's voice was flat. Helped me escape the tower, warned me about the ambush, risked everything to give me information I needed to survive. She did more for me in one night than you did in 5 years. The words landed like blows. Lucien looked like he wanted to argue, defend himself, explain away 5 years of failure. But what defense existed for a man who'd let his mistress become a better ally to his wife than he'd ever been? I'm sorry, he said finally, for all of it. For every moment I made you feel like you didn't matter. For every time I looked through you instead of at you. For building a life with someone else while you held our actual life together. Apologies are easy. Serafina moved toward the throne, studying it like she'd never seen it before. What are you actually offering to change? Everything. Lucien's voice was steady now. I'm offering to rebuild this marriage from nothing, to treat you like the partner you always were instead of the accessory I pretended you could be, to see you, hear you, value you the way I should have from the beginning. That's a nice speech. She sat on the throne, feeling the weight of it differently than she ever had before. But words are cheap, especially from a man who spent 5 years proving his words mean nothing. Then let me prove it with actions. How? The question was genuine. How do you prove 5 years of neglect won't repeat itself the moment things get comfortable again? Lucien was quiet for a long moment. Then he knelt, not a political gesture, not performance. Just a man dropping to his knees in front of the woman he'd destroyed, offering the only thing he had left. Submission. I'm offering you everything, he said quietly. The throne, the empire, all of it. You've proven you can run this realm better than I ever could. You raised an army from nothing, won loyalty I never earned, held together provinces I'd forgotten existed. You're the better ruler, so take it. Rule without me. I'll support whatever you decide. Serafina stared at him. This was what she'd wanted, wasn't it? Recognition, authority. The acknowledgement that she'd been the one actually governing while he played at being emperor. But sitting on this throne, looking down at a man offering her everything she'd been denied for 5 years, she felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just emptiness where victory should have been. Because the woman who'd wanted this throne, who'd spent 5 years desperate to be seen, was dead. Killed by neglect and betrayal and systematic destruction. The woman who'd survived was someone different. Someone who'd learned that power without partnership was just another kind of prison. Get up, she said quietly. Lucien stood, confused. I don't want your throne, Serafina continued.
I don't want to rule alone. I've spent 5 years being alone while married to you. I'm not interested in spending the next 5 being alone while replacing you. Then what do you want? I want honesty. Her voice was steady. I want you to tell me if this is guilt talking or actual change. I want to know if you're offering me the throne because you've genuinely recognized my worth or because you're afraid of losing the empire if I walk away again. The question hung in the air. Lucienne could lie, could tell her what she wanted to hear, could perform the transformation she was demanding without actually meaning it. But something in his expression shifted, the emperor mask falling away, leaving just a man who'd lost everything and was trying to figure out if anything could be salvaged. Both, he said finally. It's both. I'm terrified of losing you, terrified of watching you walk away, knowing I destroyed the best thing in my life through sheer stupidity. But I'm also genuinely seeing you for the first time, seeing what you've built, what you're capable of, who you've become. And I'm realizing that the woman I ignored for 5 years is the person I should have been learning from all along. That's not a love confession. No. His smile was sad. It's not. Because I don't know if I'm capable of the kind of love you deserved. The kind that sees you, values you, chooses you consistently instead of only when it's convenient. I was raised to be an emperor, not a husband, and I've spent our entire marriage prioritizing the role I was trained for over the person I promised to honor. The brutal honesty was more valuable than any pretty lie. So what are you actually offering? Serafina asked. If not love, if not the throne, what's left? Partnership. Lucienne met her eyes. Real partnership. Where we govern together, decide together, build something neither of us could create alone. Where I listen when you talk, value your judgment, treat you like the co-ruler you've always been. It's not romance. It's not the marriage you probably dreamed of, but it's honest, and it's more than I've ever offered you before. Serafina studied him. The man she'd married had been charming, confident, full of promises he'd never intended to keep. This man was uncertain, damaged, offering only what he could actually deliver. It was less than she'd wanted 5 years ago, but it was more than she'd had for the entire marriage. I can't trust you, she said quietly. Not yet. Maybe not ever. You destroyed that trust too thoroughly. I know. And I can't forgive you. Her voice was steady. Not for all of it. Some damage is permanent. Some betrayals can't be undone by apologies or promises. I know that too. So if we do this, if we try to build something from the wreckage, it's going to be ugly. Serafina stood, moving down from the throne to face him at eye level. It's going to be me not believing your promises. You having to prove yourself constantly, both of us carrying scars that won't heal just because we decided to try. I'm willing to live with ugly if it means you stay. I'm not staying for you. The words were gentle but firm. I'm staying for the empire, for the people who marched into battle because I asked them to, for the provinces that need someone who actually gives a damn whether they starve. I'm staying because walking away means abandoning them, not you. I'll take it. Lucienne's voice was quiet. Whatever keeps you here, whatever lets me try to become someone worthy of the partnership you're offering. I'm not offering partnership. Serafina's correction was soft. I'm offering coexistence. We govern together because it's necessary. We rebuild because the alternative is watching everything burn. But don't mistake necessity for forgiveness. Don't confuse me staying with me choosing you. Understood. She studied his face, looking for the lie, the performance, the emperor mask. But all she saw was exhaustion and brutal honesty, and a man who'd lost everything and was trying to figure out if anything could be salvaged from the ruins. It wasn't what she'd wanted 5 years ago. It wasn't love or romance or the fairy tale she'd been sold when she agreed to marry an emperor. But it was real. And after 5 years of beautiful lies, reality was worth more than any pretty fiction. The council's waiting, she said finally. Let's go deal with the empire. We'll figure out us later. They walked toward the throne room doors together. Not hand in hand, not in love, just two people who'd survived their own destruction and were trying to build something functional from the pieces. The council chamber was packed. Every noble family that had survived the coup, every military commander, every provincial representative who'd earned a seat through survival rather than birth. The old guard and the new reality,
forced to exist in the same space. Castor knelt in chains at the center, flanked by guards. His shoulder was bandaged where the arrow had taken him. His expression was defiant, but his eyes showed the trapped awareness of a man who knew exactly how this ended. Serafina took her seat at the head of the table. Lucian sat beside her. Not above her, not separate, equal position. The symbolism was deliberate. Duke Castor Vale. Her voice carried across the chamber. You're charged with treason, conspiracy, and the murder of thousands of imperial citizens through orchestrated attacks on the Eastern territories. How do you answer? Guilty. His voice was flat. Of everything except the part where I'm wrong. Murmurs rippled through the council. Serafina held up her hand for silence. Explain. This empire was dying under Lucius's rule. Castor's voice was steady. He was too focused on military expansion, too distracted by personal relationships, too blind to see that the realm was collapsing internally while he chased external glory. I did what was necessary to save it. By killing thousands? By creating a crisis that would force change. Castor met her eyes. You of all people should understand that, Your Majesty. You're the one who spent 5 years trying to fix this empire while everyone ignored you. You knew the system was broken. You just weren't willing to burn it down to rebuild it. So you burned it down for me. Serafina's voice was dangerous. Killed my people, destroyed the provinces I'd restructured, orchestrated my attempted murder, all to save the empire. No. Castor's smile was cold. I did it to save myself. The empire was just the excuse. But don't pretend you're any different. You raised an army, marched on the capital, nearly triggered a civil war. You burned plenty of bridges getting here. The words hung in the air. Because he wasn't entirely wrong. Serafina had raised provincial forces, led them into battle, gotten hundreds killed pursuing her own survival. The methods were different, but the core calculation was the same. Do whatever's necessary to achieve the goal. The difference, Serafina said quietly, is that I fought to protect people. You fought to use them. I built loyalty through care. You bought it through manipulation. We both use power. But you treated people like resources to be extracted. I treated them like humans worth saving. And you think that makes you better? Castor's laugh was bitter. You still got them killed. Those farmers who died in your desperate charge. You think they care about your noble intentions? They're just as dead as the civilians who died in my raids. The council erupted. Nobles shouting for execution. Provincial representatives demanding justice. Everyone wanting Castor silenced. But Serafina sat quiet, feeling the weight of his words. He was right. She'd led people to their deaths, made calculations about acceptable casualties, used desperate people's loyalty to fight battles that got them killed. The fact that her intentions were better didn't resurrect the dead. You're right, she said finally. The room went silent. I did get people killed. I made decisions that cost lives. I used their loyalty to fight my battles. Castor's expression shifted. He'd expected denial, not agreement. But here's the difference you're missing, Serafina continued. Those people chose to fight, chose to march into battle knowing the cost, chose to risk death rather than go back to a system that was killing them slowly. The people you killed never got a choice. You orchestrated their deaths to create chaos. I gave people options, and they chose to fight. Choice under duress isn't really choice. It's more choice than you ever gave anyone. Her voice was steel now. And it's more than you're getting now. This council finds you guilty. The sentence is death, to be carried out at dawn. Castor stared at her. That's it? No torture? No public humiliation? Just a clean execution? Just a clean execution. Serafina's voice was flat. Because I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in ending this so we can rebuild. You die at dawn. Your co-conspirators are exiled. Your families keep their lands but lose their titles. And we move forward. Merciful. Castor's tone was mocking. How noble. Not merciful. Serafina met his eyes. Practical. Every minute we spend on revenge is a minute we're not spending on governance. You're not worth the time. Guards dragged him away. The council chamber erupted in discussion. Some agreeing with the sentence, others demanding harsher punishment, everyone having opinions about justice and mercy and political necessity. Serafina let them argue. Watched nobles who'd hidden during the coup suddenly become passionate about justice. Watched them perform righteousness while conveniently forgetting they'd done nothing to prevent the crisis. This was the empire. Beautiful performances covering practical cowardice, everyone claiming principles they'd abandoned the moment they became inconvenient. She'd spent 5 years being invisible in this system, 3 weeks being hunted by it, 1 battle destroying it. Now she had to figure out if it could be rebuilt into something worth keeping. But the executions happened at dawn. Serafina watched from the palace balcony, Lucien beside her, as Castor and his primary co-conspirators faced the consequences of their choices. She'd expected to feel something, triumph, maybe, or vindication, some sense that justice was being served. But she felt nothing, just emptiness where emotion should have been. These deaths didn't resurrect the people Castor had killed, didn't undo the damage, didn't make anything better. They were just necessary, the brutal minimum required to move forward. "You handled that well yesterday," Lucian said quietly. "The council, Castor, all of it." "I handled it efficiently." Serafina's voice was flat. "There's a difference." "Still, you're a natural at this, at governing, making hard decisions, managing complex politics." "I've had 5 years of practice doing it invisibly." She glanced at him. "It's easier now that people are actually acknowledging I exist." "About that." Lucien hesitated. "I've been thinking about what you said, about partnership, about rebuilding. And I want to make it official." He pulled something from his pocket, a scroll sealed with imperial wax. "New governing structure, co-regency. Every decision requiring both our signatures, every policy needing both our approval. Real partnership written into law instead of just promised." Serafina took the scroll, breaking the seal. "Read through the legal language establishing joint authority, shared power, equal responsibility." It was everything she'd wanted 5 years ago. Recognition in writing, authority she'd earned but never received, partnership enshrined in law so it couldn't be revoked the moment it became inconvenient. "Why now?" she asked. "Why offer this after everything instead of before it fell apart?" "Because I was an idiot before." Lucien's voice was quiet. "And I'm hoping I've learned something from losing everything. Hoping that almost dying taught me to value what matters instead of what looks impressive." "That's optimistic." "It's honest." He met her eyes. "I can't promise I'll be perfect. Can't promise I won't make mistakes or fall back into old patterns. But I can promise I'll try, that I'll work every day to become someone worthy of the partnership you're offering." Serafina studied the scroll. This was the moment. Accept this new arrangement and commit to rebuilding with a man who'd destroyed her. Or refuse and walk away again, this time permanently. The smart choice was walking away, taking her influence with the provinces and building something new outside imperial structure, starting fresh without the weight of 5 years of damage. But the empire needed stability. The provinces needed someone who cared about their survival. The people who'd marched into battle for her needed to know their sacrifice mattered. And maybe, just maybe, the woman who'd survived destruction deserved a chance to build something better from the ruins. "I'll sign it," she said finally. "But we're adding clauses, protections, ways to remove you from power if you fall back into old patterns. I'm not doing this blind. I'm not trusting you to be better just because you promised to try." "Fair." Lucian nodded. "What protections do you want?" "Provincial councils with direct reporting authority to me. Financial oversight that I control. Military appointments requiring my approval." Her voice was steady. "And if I determine you're compromising the empire through incompetence or neglect, I can remove you from co-regency without council approval." "That's significant power. That's the cost of earning back trust you destroyed." Serafina met his eyes. "You spent 5 years proving you can't be trusted with absolute authority. Now you get to spend the next 5 proving you can function with oversight. Take it or leave it." Lucien was quiet for a long moment. This was humiliation. A public acknowledgement that he'd failed so completely that his wife needed legal authority to remove him if he became a problem again. But he nodded. "Draft the additions. I'll sign them." "Just like that?" "Just like that." His smile was sad. "Because you're right. I destroyed your trust, destroyed our marriage, nearly destroyed the empire. If legal oversight is what it takes to rebuild, that's a small price to pay." Serafina studied his face, looking for the catch, the manipulation, the performance. But all she saw was exhaustion and acceptance, and a man who'd learned humility the hardest way possible. "I'll have it drawn up by tonight," she said finally. "We'll sign it publicly tomorrow. Show the Empire that the new governing structure is real." "Agreed." Lucien turned back toward the palace. "I should go. Give you space. We both have a long day ahead." He left. Serafina stood alone on the balcony, watching the city wake up. Merchants opening shops, servants starting their rounds. Life continuing despite the chaos of the past month. She'd spent 5 years invisible, 3 weeks hunted, 1 battle fighting for survival. And now she was here, co-regent of an empire she'd held together while everyone else tried to tear it apart. It wasn't what she'd wanted. It wasn't love or romance or happily ever after. But it was real. It was honest. It was partnership built on brutal acknowledgement of damage instead of pretty lies about healing. And maybe that was worth more than any fairy tale. The signing ceremony happened in the Grand Hall. Every noble, every provincial representative, every person who mattered assembled to witness the new governing structure become law. Serafina wore the crown she'd removed 5 weeks ago. It felt different now. Not like a prison. Like a tool she'd earned the right to use. Lucien stood beside her wearing his own crown. They looked like what they were. 2 people who'd survived their own destruction and were trying to build something functional from the pieces. The document was read aloud. Co-regency, shared authority, protections ensuring neither could dominate the other. A partnership built on checks and balances instead of trust. They signed together. Lucien first, acknowledging the changes. Then Serafina, accepting the responsibility. The hall erupted in applause. Performance, mostly. Nobles pretending to support changes they'd fought against privately. But performance was part of governance. Serafina had learned that over 5 years of invisible administration. After the ceremony, people approached. Congratulations, offers of support, everyone wanting to be seen supporting the new power structure. Duke Aldrich was among them. He looked tired, but satisfied.
"You did it," he said quietly. "Built something real from absolute catastrophe." "We did it," Serafina corrected. "You stayed loyal when most people ran. That matters." "I just followed your example." His smile was gentle. "You spent 5 years showing me what real leadership looks like. I was just paying attention." He moved on. Others took his place. Provincial leaders thanking her for defending their territories. Merchants grateful for trade policies she'd maintained. Farmers whose families were alive because she'd restructured grain distribution. People who'd been invisible alongside her, finally getting recognized because she'd refused to stay hidden. Hours passed. The ceremony became a reception, became an endless stream of political conversation. Serafina played her role perfectly. Gracious, competent, showing no sign of the exhaustion pulling at her bones. Finally, as night fell, Lucien appeared at her elbow. "You should rest," he said quietly. "You've been performing for 8 hours." "I've been performing for 5 years." Her voice was flat. 8 hours is nothing. Still, his expression was concerned. "You fought a battle 3 days ago, nearly died a dozen times. At some point, you need to stop and breathe." "I'll breathe when the Empire's stable." "The Empire's as stable as it's going to get." Lucien gestured to the hall. "These people will keep talking whether you're here or not. Go rest." That's not a suggestion. That's a co-regent telling his partner to take care of herself. Serafina studied him. The concern was genuine. Not performance, not manipulation, just actual worry for someone who'd pushed herself past reasonable limits. "Fine," she said finally. "But if anything critical happens, I'll wake you immediately." His voice was steady. "I promise." She left the hall, climbing stairs that felt steeper than they should. Her chambers were exactly as she'd left them 5 weeks ago. Crown on the vanity, gown laid out, everything frozen in the moment before she'd walked away. She changed slowly, every muscle screaming protest, looked at herself in the mirror. She looked older, harder, like someone who'd gone to war and come back different. The woman staring back wasn't the one who'd married Lucien 5 years ago. That woman had been soft, hopeful, believing love could grow where it had been promised. This woman knew better, knew that love was optional, but partnership was essential.
That romance was a luxury, but respect was a requirement. That being seen mattered more than being adored. A knock at the door. Serafina turned, expecting Lucian or a servant. Margot stood in the doorway. Her former handmaiden looked smaller somehow, diminished. The confidence she'd worn while betraying Serafina had crumbled into something that looked like shame. "Your Majesty," her voice was barely audible. "May I speak with you?" Every instinct screamed to refuse, to have her thrown out or arrested or removed from existence. This woman had betrayed everything, had watched Serafina break for years while reporting every moment to Castor. But Serafina was tired of anger, tired of carrying rage that changed nothing. "You have 5 minutes," she said flatly. Margot entered, keeping distance between them. "I came to apologize. I know it means nothing. I know what I did is unforgivable, but I needed you to hear it anyway." "Why?" Serafina's voice was cold. "Why betray me? I trusted you, considered you family. Because I was scared." Margot's voice cracked. "Castor approached me 3 years ago, said he knew I was loyal to you, that he respected that, but that he needed information to protect the Empire from Lucian's incompetence. Made it sound noble, like I'd be helping you by giving him insight into Imperial dysfunction. And you believed him?" "I believed he was right about Lucian being a terrible emperor." Margot's eyes filled with tears. "I'd watched you suffer for years, watched him ignore you, humiliate you, treat you like furniture. Part of me thought maybe Castor could fix things, make you visible again. By reporting my every move to a man planning a coup? I didn't know about the coup, not until it was too late." Margot's voice was desperate. "By then, he had enough information to destroy my family if I stopped cooperating. I was trapped, and I'm not asking you to forgive that. I'm just trying to explain." Serafina studied her. The betrayal still burned, would probably always burn, but she understood the trap, understood what it felt like to be caught between impossible choices where every option destroyed something important. "You chose survival over loyalty," Serafina said quietly. "I can't forgive that, can't forget it, but I understand it." "I don't deserve your understanding." "You don't." Serafina's voice was flat. "But I'm done carrying hate. It's exhausting and it changes nothing. So here's what happens. You're dismissed from service. You leave the capital tonight. You never come back, and you spend the rest of your life knowing you betrayed someone who trusted you and got nothing but shame in return." Margot nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Your Majesty." "Don't thank me." Serafina turned away. "Just leave." The door closed. Serafina stood alone in her chambers, feeling the weight of 5 years finally settling onto her shoulders. She'd lost so much. Her innocence, her trust, her belief that good intentions mattered more than brutal reality. She'd been destroyed by the empire she tried to serve, betrayed by people she tried to help, nearly killed by systems she tried to fix. But she'd survived, had fought back, had built something real from absolute catastrophe. And maybe that was enough. Maybe survival and rebuilding were their own kind of victory, even if they looked nothing like triumph. She climbed into bed, exhaustion finally overwhelming everything else. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, new impossible choices. But tonight, she could rest. For the first time in 5 years, she could rest knowing she wasn't invisible anymore. 6 months passed. The empire stabilized slowly. Castor's reforms were reversed. Serafina's trade policies were reinstated. Provincial councils gave common people direct voice in governance. The system creaked under the weight of change, but didn't break. Serafina and Lucien governed together, not as lovers, not even as friends, but as partners who'd learned brutal lessons about trust and power and the cost of neglect. They had dinner together once a week, discussed policy, shared updates, functioned as co-regents. The conversations were professional, efficient, empty of personal connection, but they were honest, and that mattered more than warmth. One evening, 6 months after the signing, Lucien asked a question that broke the pattern. "Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" Serafina looked up from her meal. They were in the small dining room, not the grand hall, private space where they could stop performing. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Some damage is permanent. Some betrayals can't be undone." "I know." His voice was quiet. I just wondered if there's a path forward where we become something more than professional colleagues who share a throne. Why does that matter? Because I miss you. The words came out raw. Not the woman I married. I barely knew her. I miss the person I've been working with for 6 months. The one who's brilliant and ruthless and competent. The one who rebuilt an empire while I was too blind to see it happening. Serafina set down her fork. That's not love. That's respect you should have had 5 years ago. I know. Lucien met her eyes. But it's a start. And I'm hoping that maybe, eventually, respect can become something more. Or at least something better than what we had. And if it doesn't? She asked. If 6 months becomes 6 years and we're still just colleagues who function well together? Then we're still colleagues who function well together. His smile was sad. Which is more than most marriages have. More than we had before everything fell apart. Serafina studied him. The man across from her was different than the one she'd married. Humbler. More aware. Still flawed, but working on it. Not the partner she'd dreamed of. But maybe the partner she actually needed. Someone who'd learned the hard way that neglect destroyed everything and was determined not to repeat the mistake. I can't promise forgiveness, she said finally. Can't promise I'll ever feel for you what I felt 5 years ago. That woman's dead. You killed her. I know, but I can promise partnership. Her voice was steady. I can work with you, govern with you, build something functional even if it's not romantic. That's what I'm offering. Take it or leave it. I'll take it. Lucien's voice was quiet. And I'll keep working to become someone worthy of more, even if I never get there. They finished dinner in comfortable silence. Not the silence of strangers, the silence of people who'd survived catastrophe together and were figuring out how to exist in the aftermath. After, Serafina returned to her chambers, stood at the window overlooking the city, the same view she'd stared at 5 years ago while feeling invisible. But she wasn't invisible anymore. She was seen, valued, acknowledged, not loved, maybe, but respected. And respect earned through survival was worth more than love given without effort. She thought about the woman she'd been, soft, hopeful, desperate to be noticed. That woman would have been destroyed by what happened, would have broken completely under the weight of betrayal and attempted murder and brutal destruction. But she'd died along the way. And the woman who survived was stronger, harder, more capable of facing whatever came next. Was it worth it? Losing herself to become this? Trading innocence for competence? Sacrificing softness for survival? She didn't know. Maybe she'd never know. But she was alive. She was free. She was powerful in ways that had nothing to do with crowns or thrones or imperial authority. And maybe that was enough. The city sprawled before her, thousands of lives she'd helped save, systems she'd helped rebuild, futures she'd helped secure. Not through love or romance or fairy tale endings, through brutal determination to keep surviving until surviving became rebuilding. The queen who'd been invisible for 5 years stood in full view now, watching over an empire that had finally learned to see her. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she'd never be invisible again. Not to the people who mattered, not to herself. The cost had been catastrophic, the damage permanent, the scars eternal. But she'd survived, rebuilt, become someone capable of facing whatever came next without flinching. And in a world that tried to break her, that was its own kind of triumph. The empire had tried to destroy her. Instead, it had forged her into something far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. A woman who'd learned that the most powerful thing you could be wasn't loved or feared or adored. It was someone who'd survived everything thrown at them and refused to disappear. Serafina smiled, watching the sunrise paint the capital in gold. She was done being the forgotten queen. She was done being invisible. She was done waiting for anyone to save her. Because the woman who'd rebuilt herself from ruin didn't need saving. She was already free.